So thank you, Heather. Order. We'll get ourselves.
Yes, 100%.
Okay,
Should
great.
be,
Now,
that should be us.
so welcome everyone to the 30th meeting of the Committee for Finance in the 2022 to 27 mandate. Members, as always, the committee meeting is recorded online and throughout Parliament buildings. If anyone has a phone, it should be on silent or airplane mode. And it's not permitted to record any of this. We have no apologies, and we don't have anyone joining us. So I believe we have a full complement today. Agenda item 2 is declaration of interest. Does any member wish to declare an interest at this stage? Okay. Agenda item 3 is chairperson's business. So we're going to go through these two bits first. Actually, should we do matters arising first? We'll do chairperson's business, and then we'll have plenty of time to do the relevant matters arising. So if you were going to remember page 6, of the meeting pack, the committee has received an invitation from the Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland to a conference, Systems to Support People, our people, embedding a trauma-informed approach in January 25. So members can RSVP to that should they wish. The next agenda item is from Development Trusts NI. We previously received a request from Development Trust NI to brief the committee on the introduction of an NI Community Ownership and Wealth Building Fund. Obviously, this is something we've talked about in other areas. At that time, we agreed to schedule an informal meeting, but obviously this would be helpful given we've talked about this. So we'll get a briefing at some point in the new year, obviously, now if members are content. The next agenda item is draft minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of November. That is at page 10 of the meeting pack. If members are content, they're a true reflection. I'll sign them.
Thank you.
Okay, members content. The next agenda item is matters arising. We have a DALO, Departmental Liaison, response to some of our queries on the Public Sector Transformation Board. This was also emailed to members on the 22nd of November. The committee previously requested further information from the department on the 29 proposals selected to move forward to be considered for funding by the Public Sector Transformation Board. Members asked for a brief summary of each project and its value, as well as whether the projects were already in progress. Previously, the department had provided summary information but not the level of detail requested by members. The department is now engaged with other departments and provided fuller information on all 29 proposals, which are classified as having moved forward to stage 2 of the either stage 2 process or indeed the digital landscape review. The department has highlighted that these proposals may have been revised by departments, therefore the scope and value of these may differ in their final form when compared to the information and figures included in this return to the committee. The final information is yet to be formally shared with the Finance Minister and wider executive. Obviously, this information we are seeing has already been shared with the Finance Minister, but it is expected this information will be shared with the committee following Finance Minister and executive consideration. So this is to note. Does anyone wish to make any comment on the information that we received?
Thank you to the committee for pursuing this. It wasn't really a state secret. I'm not sure why it took us so long to get it, but it is useful to have. And obviously there'll be particular projects that members will be interested in, which we can follow up in our personal capacities.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are. I think it's interesting that we have information here, which is helpful to understand the things that are already in progress. So, for example, within a couple of those within the Justice Department, a significant one, speeding up and transforming the criminal justice system. That's a £40 million bid, but that's already in progress. That's not to say it's not a legitimate bid or that it's not a necessary and worthwhile thing to fund. It's simply that I think we should note that these aren't new transformational things. They may be transformational things, but they're certainly not new things. But of course, it may not have been possible given the notice. But is anybody else wishes to come in on that?
Just to say, we're still waiting for the minutes of the meeting on the 31st of July.
Yes, Clark, do you want to go?
We requested them.
We've requested those, but we don't have those yet. No, I thought
they're in
they're in the
the
table
pack.
pack.
Table
Yeah.
back, thank you.
Always, that's a good rejoinder from Clarity that we should always keep an eye on the table pack, and there's any not that we're not. Okay, that's helpful. Okay, so yeah, it's a page for those who want that information. It is, I think, on page 17 of the table pack. Okay, so members, are we content with that, and are we also content to share this information with other statutory committees with a view to those committees getting further briefing should they wish it? Yep, okay,
Thank
grand.
you.
The next agenda item is correspondence from the head of the civil service. That's 5.9. It's page 8 of the tabled pack. The head of the civil service indicates that the PTSB's terms of reference are a matter for the Finance Minister and Secretary of State, and that the Minister is currently engaging with the Secretary of State with a view to agreeing the terms of reference which have been agreed by the Executive. So they've been the terms of reference have been agreed by the Executive, but they haven't been agreed by the Secretary of State. The head of the civil service also confirms the interim board received all copies of all stage 2 proposals by the 23rd of October, with cleared versions subsequently confirmed by the 25th of October, so that was over a month ago. In relation to the closure of the RHI scheme, which we've also discussed recently, the head of the civil service refers the committee to the Economy Minister's written statement of the 30th of July, which advised members that the Executive confirmed its preferred option to close the non-domestic RHI scheme on the 29th of July 2024. This decision was taken with the agreement of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister via the urgent procedure under paragraph 2.14 of the Ministerial Code. Minister Murphy further advised that legislation to secure the closure would now be developed and brought back to the Executive for approval. Finally, the head of civil service indicates that on resumption of the Executive, each Minister was provided with an induction pack of relevant guidance and key documents, along with information relevant, along with briefing documents specific to their department, and provided with face-to-face briefings. So that's to note this correspondence, but and I'm happy to open up to other members in 1 second. One comment I would make is that I'm not sure, I was totally aware, it may not have been, but quite how involved the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland was in the PSTB process as opposed to just the Treasury. I think that's relatively, seems like, I wasn't aware of that, but maybe I've just missed it or forgotten about it.
I think that probably comes from the Secretary of State, or I suppose previous Secretary of State's role when the terms of the settlement were being discussed. I think it was the Secretary of State that led rather than Chief Secretary of the Treasury. That's my assumption as to why the Secretary of State would have that particular role.
Okay. Steve Aiken.
Just a quick one. Yeah, it's a masterpiece of civil service ease, the letter. But what it does bring to the fore is the fact that the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, or the Northern Ireland office, is in a key position within the Northern Ireland Executive. And I think what we probably need to do is we need to get a bit more clarity about how those roles actually pay out. Because just reading that, it just seems very strange that the Secretary of State is one, and so as other things we've heard today as well, they haven't declared with the Secretary of State before they agree some of these things. So actually this degree of transformation funding is in the gift of the Secretary of State. It's not actually in the gift of the Northern Ireland Executive.
Would anyone else like to come in? Deputy Chair?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And just to follow on from Steve Aiken as well, given this committee's concern over the decisions already made by an interim board, if it has to then go through the Secretary of State, what exactly is the governance process here? Will everything potentially have to be revisited? Obviously we can question the Minister to this when she's in, but I definitely think we need a little bit of clarity. If the Secretary of State holds that level of authority, what about the work that has already been done?
I think that makes sense. First of all, would anyone else like to come in on this? I think that it may be that there's a reference to this in somewhere else, but I don't remember it, but I'm happy always for my ignorance to be corrected, because that's happens more than a little. I think it would be helpful for us to get clarity from the department on precisely its understanding or its account of the role of the NIO in all of this, because if the terms of reference have to be signed off by the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and a member of the Interim Transformation Board is the Permanent Secretary of the NIO, then it would appear that the NIO, and now this is an ongoing, clearly this is something that was agreed with the UK government, so they have a role by definition, but it would just be helpful to get a bit more detail on how those accountabilities work.
Chair, I think before officials had referenced that they were working in lifetime with Treasury officials on this, and that I think was the committee's understanding previously.
Yeah.
The terms of reference were being discussed with Treasury.
Yes, I think that is interesting. I think that, and it relates to another matter we have later on in relation to the from the Secretary of State. Is I do think it's important for us to understand where the accountabilities lie, because if what's happened is that the kind of day-to-day responsibility for this is moved from the Treasury to the NIO, then that's useful for us to know and to understand. Okay, if people are content, we will get that information and we'll go through a couple of other matters arising while we await our first evidence session. The next item is from the Justice Committee, and it's the NI Policing Board response to the draft programme for government. That's at page 33 of the meeting pack. The Justice Committee forwarded us that response to the PFG, and that is to note unless any member wishes to make a specific comment on it. The next agenda item is also from the Justice Committee. It relates to the Department of Justice's October monitoring round 24-25 position. The Justice Committee has forwarded a written paper from the Department of Justice on its October monitoring round 24-25 position as submitted by DOF, submitted to DOF, on the 25th of October, including the completed and submitted monitoring forms. The Justice Committee should receive a further briefing on the 12th of December. This is to note, unless any member wishes to make any comment, I would say well done to the Justice Committee, who are a bit more, who are quite, and indeed the Justice Department, who are a bit more in terms of us keeping on top of information sharing and all of that. They are top of the class, I would say. The next agenda is also from the Justice Committee, and that is consideration of an amendment to the NICS handbook, and relates to something we discussed last week with NICS HR. Members will recall previous correspondence from the Justice Committee regarding sickness absence processes in the NI Civil Service and the consideration of psychological injuries and post-traumatic stress disorder. This was discussed, as I said, with NICS HR officials at last week's meeting. The Justice Committee is again highlighting its concerns regarding the use of the NICS inefficiency sickness absence procedures in respect of dealing with prison custody officers and other prison service staff. The Justice Committee believe that staff working within the NI prison service have unique circumstances in respect of psychological injury, and they think that the NICS handbook does not appropriately cover those. The Justice Committee suggested the review of civil service sickness takes account of this in 24-25. So the committee may wish to ask the Department for Finance its view on that, given the Department of Finance. I'm happy for us to ask that question. Given the
Chair,
Justice
yes,
Committee.
please.
Yes,
Well, obviously with
Stephen.
my previous declaration about prison officers.
Okay, so we will respond to the Justice Committee, and we will write to the Department to seek its views on that. Okay, members, I am told that we will have our that we do now have our first witnesses with us, and as always, please do indicate should you wish to ask a question. We discussed before we started how we would manage it and try and make best use of our time, and indeed best use of the Minister's time. But we welcome the Minister. Thank you very much for coming to join us. Minister Dr. Keith Archibald, Minister of Finance, and officials, Permanent Secretary Neil Gibson, and Joanne McBurney, also from the Department. So thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you, Minister. We're aware your time is limited, though we'd slightly longer. We appreciate that you're here and answering our questions. We welcome an opening statement. Can I suggest, given we have got limited time, that we and that you are a master at concision in the Assembly Chamber, so I'm sure that will not be a problem to you. We would appreciate a short opening statement, and then we can get to questions. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. I think it's fair to say a lot has happened since I was last with you in March. and I know my officials have been providing regular briefings, and I thank them for that and for their support and work over the past number of months, which have been very busy. I also want to thank the committee for your interest and support and engagement, and of course your challenge and scrutiny. The Department of Finance is a department that enables others. Our role is to assist, support and advise. As the department, we are on a journey of continuous improvement, professionalising our services and seeking opportunities to improve performance. We invest in our people, recruiting and supporting civil servants and providing career pathways and opportunities for people to develop. We are working together with others to improve effectiveness across the public sector, transforming the way we work. Significant progress is being made in relation to the development of our 5-year people strategy. We have made real progress in relation to our legal services, and work is advancing to transform finance and HR services through Integrate. Colleagues in NISRA continue to provide vital information to support evidence-based policy and informed decisions, including preparations for the next census. We collect rates revenue to provide vital funding towards public services, and as a department we have managed to live within budget last year and are on target to do so again this year. In the most challenging of financial contexts, we are working together with executive colleagues to allocate resources to where they are most needed to support the delivery of public services. And I want to take just a few minutes to set out the context on a number of important issues that I'm sure you will be keen to discuss. I will begin by talking about the executive's finances. Work is now at an advanced stage on Budget 25-26. I am currently engaging with executive colleagues on our approach, and therefore I cannot yet set out the full details, but one highlight I know the committee will be pleased to hear is that we have received a higher level of bids for financial transaction capital than has previously been the case.
Is it being discussed at the, can I just ask, is it being discussed at the executive tomorrow, Minister?
There is no executive tomorrow.
There is no executive.
Yeah.
That's a straight answer.
I intend to launch a draft budget for consultation subject to executive agreement in early December, ensuring that this committee, the Assembly and the public can all have their say on what I would like to hope will be the last single-year budget. In May, I signed the interim fiscal framework, securing a commitment from the Treasury to review how the executive is funded going forward. The interim fiscal framework has resulted in an additional £431.4 million being available to the executive this year and next, demonstrating the difference it is making with hundreds of millions of additional funding for public services. This framework was an important first step in securing long-term fiscal sustainability to ensure our public services are fairly and properly funded. And I think we are all in agreement transformation is essential if the executive is to put our finances on a sustainable footing. In May, I secured executive agreement to the creation of a public sector transformation board to make progress on the ring-fence funding included in the financial package for transformation. I know the committee has received briefings from the chair of the board and head of civil service, Jane Brady, and my officials. This work has been progressing at pace, and last week I received advice from the board on those 11 proposals through to stage 2. I am currently considering the next steps. The executive has also agreed the terms of reference for the Public Sector Transformation Board, and I will soon be meeting with the British Secretary of State to finalise these. Following this, I will of course update the committee. But as well as one eye on the future, we need to look at the challenges people and businesses face today. In May, I reinstated the Back in Business scheme and the Rural ATM scheme to assist both footfall and cash flow in our towns and cities. My department also extended the Small Business Rate Relief Scheme for 24-25, supporting over 30,000 businesses. At the start of July, the Executive agreed allocations of over £250 million resource and £50 million capital as part of the June monitoring round, including funding for education, health and new build social housing. July saw a change of government at Westminster, with Labour taking up office, and unfortunately soon after we saw some regrettable decisions, including the changes to the winter fuel payment and then in September the pausing of city and growth deals. Working together with the councils and their partners, the Executive and elected members from right across the Assembly chamber, including this committee, we strongly made the case for the pause to be lifted, and I believe our shared common purpose helped deliver a successful outcome to enable the Causeway Coast and Glens and Mid-South West growth deals to progress, and I want to thank the committee for their support in that. In October, the Executive agreed the Budget Sustainability Plan. This sets out the Executive's ambition of longer-term plans and improvements to the budgeting process. I have established a small team to progress this work. This will focus on ensuring better transparency, developing long-term plans for departments, and putting in place the building blocks for fiscal sustainability. While the interim fiscal framework helps stabilise our funding, there are commitments within the framework which need to be met. These include agreeing the mechanisms for how the 124% needs-based factor will operate going forward, settling the relative funding per head methodology, and developing the evidence base for negotiating a higher level of need than 124%. My officials are actively engaging with their Treasury counterparts on these issues, and in time will also be progressing commitments in relation to increased tax and borrowing powers. In my view, increased fiscal devolution would allow an executive increased control to manage priorities locally. It would allow us to make different choices, change behaviours to spur economic activity or to raise revenue for public services in a fairer and more progressive way. The end of October saw the British Chancellor's autumn budget statement. The level of in-year funding we received reflects the reality of underfunding of public services following 14 years of austerity. While the autumn statement provided some additional funding, there is still much to do. We need continued investment over coming years to help transform public services. There are also clear areas of concern stemming from the autumn budget, including the impact of increased employer national insurance contributions, particularly for our small businesses and for the community and voluntary sector that deliver services in partnership with or on behalf of government. The changes in agricultural property relief and the impact that this will have on our farming community. The reduction in the Shared Prosperity Fund is also an area of apprehension and concern for our community and voluntary sector. Following the autumn budget, my department worked at pace to progress October monitoring round, which was agreed by the Executive on the 11th of November. This saw allocations of £631.5 million resource funding for departments for pressures and pay, with £68 million of capital being invested in social housing and infrastructure. However, even with these allocations, departments are still facing a shortfall of £180 million. All departments will have to make savings or reduce what they would want to do in order to live within their allocations. However, despite these funding challenges, we must do everything we can to find the money to cover public sector pay awards. I remain fully committed to working together with ministerial colleagues to try and find a way forward in respect of the public sector pay challenges that we face. Our public sector workers deserve to be paid fairly, given their vital role in the provision of our public services, and that we will not be able to deliver on our transformation objectives without their support. That is why I continue to ask all ministers to do what they can to deliver savings and identify these as early as possible so that any funding available can be prioritised for public sector pay awards. All ministers have a responsibility to weigh up their pressures against our ability and the need to provide public sector pay awards. The levers we have to pull to increase revenue to provide services and cover pay are limited. Our rating system generates some £1.5 billion of funding annually for public services. I am determined to build a progressive rate system which grows our tax base and stimulates our economy. In October, I issued a paper to executive colleagues outlining my short, medium and long-term plans for the rating system. One of the changes that I have been asked about a lot following the earlier consultation pertained to the level of maximum capital value within our domestic rating system. The specifics of the policy proposals pertaining to the cap remains with the Executive at this point. I appreciate that rating matters that affect households and businesses need to be carefully considered, and therefore I will continue to work with the Executive on progressing policy changes that can be made in the shorter term. I know that officials from LPS will be briefing you on preparations for domestic reval 2030 next month. My focus will now be shifting to the medium and long-term strategic approach. The Committee and Assembly will be updated as soon as possible in respect of this. Before closing, I want to touch briefly on some other important work streams for my department in the time ahead. These include reforming our marriage law to put belief marriage on an equal footing with religious marriage and to increase the minimum age from 16 to 18. Introducing a baby loss certificate scheme to give parents and families who have suffered a devastating loss to feel that their grief is recognised. Accelerating the review of our office estate. This is already delivering tangible benefits, enabling £24.4 million of capital to be allocated in October monitoring to areas such as social housing and infrastructure. Advancing the Integrate programme, which will modernise and integrate NIC's HR and finance, and supporting our people by developing a new civil service people strategy and reviewing our HR policies. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. When I became Finance Minister, I said I was determined to work together with people to deliver for our citizens, and I believe my actions to date reflect that. I hope these remarks have provided you with a helpful overview to inform and shape our discussions and address the most pressing issues. There is no doubt that the financial outlook for public services remains incredibly difficult. As I've said on numerous occasions, articulating problems is very easy. The challenge for us all is in how we address them. I know that change can be daunting and uncomfortable, but if we keep doing the same things, people will keep getting the same outcomes. As the draft programme for government says, our plan, doing what matters most. So we must all work together to do what matters most. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And we will ask the questions that matter most, hopefully, here, and obviously short questions and hopefully short answers as well, so we can get through as much as possible given our time is limited. So first of all, Minister, you mentioned on multiple occasions there the need to reform our taxation system to make it more progressive and to use more levers or to get more taxation powers. When can we expect to see those proposals?
So, as you will obviously be aware, we signed the interim fiscal framework back in May that I suppose codified our needs-based factor of 124%, but it also set out the direction of travel and the way forward in relation to work that needs to be done. And in particular, there is, I guess, some immediate work that needs to be done prior to the spending review that's upcoming in the spring. The British government had agreed to review the executive's funding in advance of the 26-27 cliff edge that we face in respect of the financial package funding, and the relevant spending review for that is now the spring spending review. So officials are working at pace to progress the information that's needed in relation to understanding the methodology that is used to calculate the 124%, but also some of the evidence that will be required if we are to try and make the case, as the executive believes that we should, to look at our level of need being higher than 124. Contained within the interim fiscal framework was a commitment to look at the principles of fiscal devolution. So it's the same team of people who are doing both pieces of work, and their immediate priority, I guess, is looking at that level of need work while also progressing the work in relation to the recommendations from the Fiscal Commission report and the consultation that was done in respect of that. And I will be bringing proposals to the executive in the near future in relation to that also.
You'll be bringing proposals to the executive on further fiscal devolution?
Well, to take forward any proposals in relation to that will require the agreement of the executive. It would be considered a cross-cutting issue, and at that it affects our budget, and therefore we will need to get political consensus from the executive on the way forward.
Certainly, but I suppose what I'm asking is when will there be an executive meeting in which you will say my preference is that we, for example, seek to get income tax variation powers, or whatever it is? I'm not saying that it will be that, but when do you expect to be able to bring those proposals to the executive? At what date in the calendar?
As I've indicated, the fiscal team in the department, which is very small, 2 or 3 people I think we have working on our fiscal team, are currently prioritising the work in relation to our funding level in advance of the spending review, and understanding the methodology behind the 124% needs-based calculation, and also working to firm up that evidence base that will be required to make the case that our level of need should be higher. So you will appreciate that that is the immediate priority for them, but they are also progressing that work in relation to fiscal devolution.
I appreciate you that there are capacity limitations on the individual officials, but I'm just interested in that you've been now 10 months in post, and I think the Fiscal Commission itself reported about 3 years ago.
May 2022.
You're 3.5. Well, yeah, what's that? 2.5. Do you have a preference, understanding that the executive would have to agree to? Do you have a preference on tax raising powers that we should be seeking?
Well, the Fiscal Commission set out a number of recommendations, and there are principles, I suppose, underpinning the devolution of fiscal powers that will also have to be progressed. The sharing of risk, for example, between the British Treasury and the Executive. So there is a significant piece of work that needs to be done prior to us proposing to the Treasury that we want to get power X, Y or Z. And as I say, we will need the agreement of the Executive before we can go to Treasury and make it. I would have a preference in that I would like to see maximum devolution of powers, but I think we have to work through a process here in relation to how we take this forward.
Okay. Relative technocratic answer, we'll move on for now. Just finally, from me, before bringing others, when do you expect to bring the paper? If it's not happening this week, when do you expect to bring the 25-26 budget to the Executive?
Well, Joanne and her team are working at pace in relation to that. I'm engaging with executive colleagues in terms of agreeing our approach to that budget. There's a number of things that will have to be, I suppose, bottom out and agreed as to what decisions the executive would like to take in respect of certain issues, and I'm sure we'll come on to some of those in the course of the discussions. It would be our intention, and we have said from the get-go, early December. There wasn't an executive meeting scheduled this week. There is an executive meeting scheduled next week, and we would be hoping to progress it in the very near future. Joanne, do you want to add anything to that?
No, that's it. Just to say we're still working through, obviously, substantive returns from departments, which we're working through at pace.
Okay. And will there be anything, do you think, in the 25-26 budget around Casement Park?
Well, I don't have the specifics of the bids from the Communities Minister in front of me, but I would anticipate that he will have made capital bids in respect of his departmental priorities, and allocations will be made accordingly.
Would you hope he makes a bid in relation to Casement Park, or would you encourage him to?
Yes, of course, yeah.
Okay, we'll bring in colleagues. Deputy Chair.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks,
you.
Minister, for being here today to take our questions. I wanted to ask around the financial restoration package and then the interim fiscal framework. So these things were signed under the previous UK government, and now that we've moved to the new Labour government, I just wanted to ask around your engagement with the new Labour government and Treasury officials about both of those and what their feeling is as to them, and picking up the things that were discussed and how much it's open for conversations.
Yeah, so in respect of the interim fiscal framework, it was signed on behalf of the Executive and the British government, so it would be an agreement that would continue even though there has been a change of government. I've had significant engagement with the new Treasury officials, with both the Chief Secretary to the Treasury and also the Chancellor. I've met the Chancellor on 2 occasions, and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury on maybe 3 or 4 separate occasions. We have discussed the whole range of matters, including progressing the commitments within the interim fiscal framework. They have adopted the same approach in respect of that. We've also, as you will appreciate, have had some engagement with them around issues like the city and growth deals, when there was very poor handling of that, and we had to engage with them in respect of that. But we will be continuing that engagement. Officials are on an engagement with Treasury officials on a weekly basis, including in relation to some of those commitments in the interim fiscal framework, and progressing that work that is quite urgent at this point to have completed in advance of the spending review.
Thank you. And whenever the Assembly was restored in February, one of the first things that was brought to the floor was the collective agreement of everyone as to how we would be looking for further review of our finances here. And as we're moving forward, it's very clear that the baseline finance that we have isn't enough to sustain our public services in order to place us well to take forward transformation. And has there been any update from what they've sent you as to how live that is, or how reactive they are to re-reviewing our baseline?
So that is the urgent piece of work that I'm referring to in respect of our level of need. So it's the methodology behind the calculation of our level of need, and it's also providing that evidence base in respect of making the case that our level of need is higher than 124. We, as part of the fiscal framework, had a commitment that we could plan on the basis that we would be funded at or above the 124% level of need. That would be as our baseline. but that would be reviewed at the relevant spending review. So that is what officials in the fiscal team are urgently focused on at the moment, and that we will be taking forward in respect of our engagement with the Treasury in the near future.
I appreciate that obviously the officials and, I think Neil and Joanne who, attend the committee and do give us detailed briefings on this are doing their best, but, with limited access to more information and finances, they're very tied with what can be brought forward. And in terms of our current pressures, when looked at this month's outturn reports, it looks like the overcommitments certainly aren't coming down. If anything, they look like they're going up a little bit. And as well as that, we had the budget statement, which has put the increase on the employers' contributions significantly. And looking at some of the figures coming through from the different bodies, the Minister for Health said it's going to be an increase of over 100 million from his, for Education Authority over 50 million, and Civil Service some 20 million. You had responded to me on that as well. Have you had any indication from Treasury as to how much of that increase that they're going to fund?
So I think the national insurance increases is something that we are very concerned about, both from a public sector perspective, but also the impact on our community and voluntary sector and our businesses. And I've had significant representation, as I'm sure you all have, from both of those. In relation to the public sector piece, we have had a commitment, I suppose you could say, from the Chancellor that support will be provided for the public sector employers, but in public sector employers only. Joanne can perhaps speak to the engagement that she has had with Treasury around that. There have been some indications around the expectation of the amount of money that we will get. We think it will fall short of what is required, and certainly the Scottish Finance Minister was quoted in the media yesterday saying the same from her perspective, and I think that is going to further compound the budgetary pressures that we are facing into next year, with a considerable amount of money added to what is already pressures on departments. Joanne, do you want to say?
Yeah, we haven't a number confirmed yet, but we get from Treasury, but the indications are that they'll apply the Barnett formula to allocations to Whitehall departments, and even with the 124% applied, that won't fund all of our pressures. So, like the Scottish Minister has
Do you think
come out.
that would be short? I see the Scottish are estimating it's only 3/5 that they're potentially getting. How much short do you think we would be?
We haven't had an actual confirmed number yet, and we're still working with departments to identify the total cost to them. So I don't have an actual, but it will fall far short.
And when would the Treasury tell you how much they're going to fund of that?
The numbers are not usually confirmed until supplementary estimates later in the year, but we'll be pressing them to give us as much information as they can at an early date. It's also important to know sort of where that's coming from as well. For example, does it cover local government support in England, etc.? So that there's a lot to work through yet, but I think we're very concerned, as are obviously colleagues in Scotland.
Obviously, it was unconsulted and it came out of nowhere for everyone, our private sector, voluntary community sector and the public sector, and when we're already under pressure, it's a huge pressure for everyone. Thank you.
Steve Aiken.
Yep, thanks very much indeed, Minister, and thanks everybody for coming today, and thanks, Minister, for coming to talk to us. Look, just two very quick questions. Obviously, you've alluded to where we are with the sort of the financial situation and where we're looking forward. Can you outline any discussions you've had about how the comprehensive spending review is going to look like? Because bearing in mind we're looking at sort of 2 years, potentially 3 years hence, are we getting indications of how that's likely to pan out? And the second one, and I know your party leader was said tongue-in-cheek that you didn't have any loaves and fishes, but one of the real issues, particularly about the agriculture sector, is funding that no longer will be ring-fenced. How is that beginning to look when you start looking to formulate the budget for next year? Those are just the two questions, Minister. Thanks.
Okay. So the first point again, sorry.
Comprehensive spending review.
So yes,
what
of course.
indications are you beginning to get? Because I think we've already had from the Deputy Chair the indication that there's concerns about net contributions and the changes that might be in the shortfall. But discussions should be ongoing now about the main points for CSR going forward.
Yeah, I maybe let Joanne come in and speak to engagement that she has had in respect of that. We haven't had substantive engagement at a CST to Finance Minister level as yet. We had been working obviously through the budget for the next financial year. It's our understanding that the spending review in the spring will be for 2 years, so it will be a 1+2 3-year spending review, so to speak, and it's our intention that we would be looking at doing a 2-year budget from that point. So hopefully this will be the last of our single-year budgets. That obviously gives departments a little bit more certainty in relation to being able to plan and to manage their pressures. In respect of the agriculture funding, I had worked with the Agriculture Minister in advance of the budget, and we had made the case to Treasury that the agriculture funding should remain ring-fenced, that it also should be uplifted in line with inflation. They did neither of those things. Obviously, it will be for the executive to take a position in respect of all of its funding priorities for the budget. But my view would be that we should continue to ring fence our agriculture funding and give that certainty to our farming and agriculture sector.
And just one very small one. Thank you very much indeed for your commitment to public sector pay, but you obviously know where this question is going to as well. With the outturns that we're seeing at the moment, is there going to be sufficient headroom to pay for the public sector pay across the sectors that we have from what you're seeing at the moment?
Well, what I would say is that since we came into the executive, since we came back in February, we have tried to prioritise our public sector workers and public sector pay, and I remain fully committed to working with all of my executive colleagues to try and find a way forward in respect of that. I had met with the Health Minister on a number of occasions since the October monitoring round itself, myself and the First and Deputy First Minister, to discuss trying to find a way forward in respect of that. I have written to my ministerial colleagues post October monitoring round, asking them all to do what they can to identify savings within their own departments. Obviously that will be a challenge because many of them, I think all of them, are still facing pressures, but there is a responsibility, I guess, on each of us as ministers to weigh up our pressures against that need to deliver for our public sector workers, and I have asked ministers to try and identify those savings and identify them as quickly as possible so that we can prioritise that towards public sector pay. Health workers obviously and the health ministers facing particular challenges, but so too is the education minister and myself as the minister that's responsible for the civil service. So I'm committed to doing whatever I can to prioritise that and to find a way forward.
Okay. £127 million problem.
Okay. Jerry Carroll.
Thank you, Minister. Thanks. Public Sector Transformation Board, two projects didn't pass to the next stage. The revitalisation of the Housing Executive, one of those schemes, and the Warm Homes Health Pilot Scheme. Appreciate you're not over maybe all these details, but certainly the Housing Executive one is of interest for obvious reasons. Do you have any information on that? Does that involve possible mutualisation, privatisation, and just specifically any reasons why both those schemes didn't move to the next stage?
So I don't have the details of individual projects. Obviously those will have come through from each of the departments approved by their ministers and being considered by the Public Sector Transformation Board, and it's their role to sift those to ensure that they meet the criteria in respect of being transformative first and foremost, and then to make recommendations to me. So they have concluded their evaluation of the stage 2 proposals, and they have now written to me in respect of that, and I will be bringing recommendations forward to the executive. I can't comment on all of the specifics, but if you want to write to me,
I appreciate that, and I've got more information on it. I mean, obviously I'd be concerned if there was any applications to privatise aspects of the Housing Executive, but also would be concerned if there was a plan to refund it in a different measure that wasn't accepted. Final question just for this round, Minister, is obviously Fujitsu. I've raised different times, just like Joanne and different officials in different capacities. I mean, obviously the EA have effectively halted its contract with Fujitsu for their own reasons, but I note that one of their heads of Fujitsu said he doesn't know if one of the programmes is reliable. So given different departments' involvement with Fujitsu, have you had any conversations with your officials? Do you have the power to intervene to stop under procurement legislation contracts with Fujitsu, or is it on your radar?
So in respect of any public procurement and any contracts, that's regulated through the public contract regulations, and they have to be managed in accordance with the terms and conditions of those agreements. It wouldn't be possible to terminate those, because of the concerns that you have mentioned in respect of that. but it's something obviously that has been in the media, and I suppose in respect of the Horizon public inquiry, which is still ongoing, and so senior officials from my department along with Cabinet Office continue to meet with Fujitsu, and once the inquiry publishes its findings, the Cabinet Office will review the findings and advise an appropriate action and the way forward. Neil, you might want to comment some further on that.
Yes, just as Minister has said, we continue to operate under the guidelines, and we will take any advice from that committee as and when that is published. But for now, we continue to monitor any Fujitsu contracts that we have, as we would with any other supplier, and indeed their ability to bid into other contracts remains unaffected until we see that
To
forward.
clarify, sorry, Chair, do we have to wait from a direction from the Cabinet Office before making any decisions, or can you or can the Executive make?
No, we would fall under the Procurement Act and the procurement law, so we would continue to treat them as we would any other supplier at this point in time, until such times as that inquiry publishes.
Thank you.
Okay, Nicola Brogan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, and Neil and Joanne for attending here this afternoon. It's good to have you here with us. I just want to go back to the employers' national insurance contributions and increase to that there. As a committee, we've heard from the FSB briefly just the concerns that small businesses have in regards to this year, because they're already facing issues with cost of living increases to that there, and I suppose just overall with inflation, the increase to cost of operating. And Minister, you've mentioned community and voluntary sector as well, and on a constituent level I've received queries and issues around healthcare workers and GP services and those with the good old contracts and dental practices as well, concerned about how they're going to pay their staff whenever there's issues within the remuneration they're getting for the work they're doing anyway, and then with these increased costs as well. So I'm just wondering how concerned you are, I suppose, about these increases and what impact it'll have on the public sector and on our services.
Yeah, I think we are very concerned about it, both from a public sector perspective, but also from that community and voluntary and business perspective. It's clear that it's going to have a significant impact. I met with NICVA and a range of community and voluntary organisations earlier this week, along with the Communities Minister and Economy Minister, and that was one of the issues obviously that they had raised with us. And these are organisations that are supporting government to deliver really important services, and they were quoting figures of what it was going to add to each of their pay bills, and it's very concerning for them, obviously, as individual organisations. What we had actually been scheduled to meet about was the Shared Prosperity Fund, and at the same time as we're seeing this hike in national insurance, we have also seen a cut to the funding for shared prosperity. So it's a bit of a double hit for some of those organisations. So what we had asked of them is that they share that evidence about the cost that it's going to have and the potential impact on their services with us, to help us make representations to the British government in relation to that. We've had similar representations from business organisations about the impact on small businesses, and likewise from a constituency perspective, I have had some of those representations that you refer to also. And while there will be support for the public sector, for the likes of GPs and dentists, we don't understand that is the case. Obviously that case is being made in England as well, and I'm sure that representative bodies will be very loud in making that case, and we will continue to work with our Scottish and Welsh counterparts in terms of understanding the impact that it's going to have on all of the devolved administrations, and make representations accordingly.
Okay, thank you for that. In regards to public sector pay, obviously I know you advise ministers to try and prioritise it within their budgets, and we don't have the funding that we want and need from the British government, but it is important that we do prioritise the public sector workers because of the invaluable work that they do. So just wonder what kind of engagement you've had with other ministers within the executive since the announcement through the October monitoring round.
Yeah, and I've engaged with my own unions, as I know other ministers have, since October monitoring round took place, and I have engaged with individual ministers and at an executive level in respect of public sector pay, specifically with the Health Minister, in relation to the challenges that he is facing. But then as an executive, we are all facing challenges in that respect. And as I said to Steve, I have encouraged ministers to look within their own departmental budgets and see if any savings can be found, and to try and identify those as quickly as possible. And I think as an executive, we're committed to working together to find a way forward in respect of public sector pay, because we very much recognise both the need for our public sector workers to be properly recompensed for their work and to get fair pay, but also we have a transformation agenda, and we need to have the support of our workers to be able to deliver on that. And it's really important that we have good relationships and that they are valued in the work that they are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Just finally, I want to touch upon what Steve has already mentioned as well about the agricultural funding. So this was previously funded through Europe with the CAP, Common Agricultural Policy, and then it was ring fenced by the last British government, and now that has been baseline. So I think it's around over 300 million. And that includes payments for farmers and for fisheries and for rural development, which is a massive issue, obviously for me locally, like representing a large rural area. So I think it's important to remember that there too when we're having those discussions. But also farmers are facing their own issues as well when it comes to inheritance tax. We've all had we're all well aware of those issues, but it is another concern for them. And I know you've said you are supportive of this funding being ring fenced, which I'm glad, and so am I. I think farmers need that kind of certainty moving forward. But I just wonder if you can maybe explain what the process will be moving forward. I know you said you've engaged with the Minister Federa, and I just wonder what the process will be as we head on.
So we're currently in the process of setting the budget for 25-26. All departments will have made their representations to us in respect of what their pressures are, and the case for specific items like the ring fencing of the Agriculture Fund, which the Agriculture Minister has done. And it will then be for the executive to take a position on each of those specific asks. But I anticipate that there will be support for the ring fencing of agriculture, just given the kind of commentary that I've heard from parties that are in the executive. And I said it would be my recommendation that we would continue to ring fence that funding so that our farming community does have that certainty, and obviously single farm payment and everything that will have to come out of that budget, that it would be important to give that certainty and clarity to our agriculture community.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Minister. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Owen Tennyson.
Thank you, Chair. And just sticking with that outlook, Minister, for 2025-2026, are you in a position at this stage to update the committee on what the scale of the pressures for 25-26 may be versus the funding that's available?
I'll maybe let Joanne come in on the specifics on that, but we are still working our way through it with departments. But needless to say, I suppose it is what the pressures are far outweighs the funding that we have available to allocate, both in respect of our resource and our capital.
Yeah, I don't have the details of the bids with me either, but as usual, the pressures far outweigh the funding available.
And is there even a ballpark, Joanne, at this stage, or are you just not in a position to...
Wouldn't like to give you a number off the top of my head in case I got it wrong.
That's no problem. Obviously, Minister, you had previously outlined that you wanted to bring proposals for changing to the rating system that were short, medium and long term to raise additional funding. It's been some time since you indicated that was your intention. Yep. Can you update us on what the status of that work is and why we haven't seen it yet?
So as I said in my opening remarks, I had brought proposals to the executive. They haven't made the agenda of the executive as yet. I am keen that we ensure that we have a rating system that's up to date, that is as fair and equitable as possible. I have spoke because I've been asked about specific things. For example, the max cap, which I was minded to look at raising the level to, in some respect, to make it more progressive. Unfortunately, the proposals haven't made it as far as the executive table yet, but I will be continuing to work with colleagues to try and advance on some of the more medium and longer term aspects in that, to take a more strategic look at our rating system and to look at the policies, the rate and relief measures that we have in place, and make sure that they are still achieving the policy objective that they were put in place to do. So I hope to be able to update the committee in the near future in relation to the way forward in respect of that.
Okay, and so you're not in a position today to outline your priorities in terms of rating policy?
No,
okay.
not yet.
No problem.
Just ask why hasn't it got on the executive agenda? Sorry, Lorna, we'll come back.
Okay.
Why hasn't it got? If you have brought the paper to the executive, why hasn't it been discussed?
Well, the agenda is agreed by the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, and a number of ministers have expressed support for my proposal, but it hasn't yet made the agenda.
Am I to understand that the executive office has not agreed to going on the agenda?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, go. Sorry.
No, you're okay, Chair. Thank you. Sticking then sort of with the dynamics within the executive, if I may, Minister, obviously there wasn't support around the executive table unanimously for October monitoring. But can I just ask, did you receive any alternative propositions from any minister in terms of October monitoring allocations?
I didn't receive any alternative proposals. Joanne, you can keep me right just to make sure that I'm not saying anything wrong there. But I guess what I would say, Owen, to be fair to ministers, is that I do recognise that every minister has pressures within their departments, and that it will be very difficult for them to manage. And a number of ministers also have pay pressures, and we want to do the best that we can as individual ministers for both our individual departments, but also the pay groups that we represent. And I think it's been a difficult year in terms of our budgetary outlook. I don't see it improving by any great strides going forward, but I think it is important that we try to achieve that kind of collective consensus in respect of our budget, and going forward I hope that we do.
Thank you. That's me for now, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Owen. Philip Brett is next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. You're certainly across your brief, so I want to just congratulate you on the work that you're doing. Just in terms of the proposals that you have submitted to the executive in terms of your short-term review of rates, what are you looking to do? So I know you've said in terms of removing the upper limit of cap. Is there anything else that you're looking to do? So the early discount, are you looking to remove that?
So I don't want to get into the specific details of what's still sitting with the executive, and I will be still trying to find a way forward in respect of that. Just to clarify, in relation to the max cap also, it wasn't removing it, it was raising it in, I suppose, a more progressive way, because if you remove the cap, which was the proposal from the British Secretary of State, you could end up with some properties, householders here paying rates of up to £25,000, which I don't think any of us would think that it was overly reasonable, particularly when you look at the equivalent in England, which would be council tax, and while it's not directly comparable, your highest bills would be about £5,000 or £5,500. So that's a comparison. So it was to try and to have a more progressive look at that.
And then how much money would your proposals raise?
Again, I don't want to get into the specifics of that, given that the executive hasn't yet considered it.
I know the executive obviously hasn't agreed this, but you clearly have a position that you wish to see adopted by the executive. So in your position, how much money would be raised?
I don't want to get into the specifics of it, Philip, just given the fact that the executive hasn't yet considered the proposals, and it would require executive agreement to take those proposals forward. As I say, I do want to try and move that forward in the very near future, and I would be very happy to update the committee in respect of that and to talk that through when we do.
Well, Minister, you have it publicly indicated your intention. I mean, you told the media with respect that you wanted to pursue this policy, and you said you've already given some detail that it would be an increase in the cap rather than an abolition of the cap. So obviously, I'm sure Philip Brett would love you to share with him how much it might raise. And
I'm sure that somebody who is better at maths than me could probably back calculate the increase if I was to say the amount that it potentially could raise. So,
just in terms of finally on the short term, is there a cut-off point? Obviously LPS will then have a process to go through before issuing rates bills. Yes. for next year. What is the hard cut-off for any changes to the rates for 25-26?
It's already passed. So I had hoped that we would have considered it before now, because I would have had to go back out to consultation, and it would have only required secondary legislation to make the amendments that I was proposing, but it would still have had a legislative process to go through, so it won't be possible to implement any of those changes now for 25-26. So we won't be able to raise any additional revenue in the incoming financial year from those proposals.
And then just finally from me, Chair, what's your assessment so far, Minister, of the decisions made by the Public Sector Transformation Board?
Well, the Public Sector Transformation Board haven't made decisions as such. They've made recommendations to me as Finance Minister. They have went through a process, and I think the feedback certainly that we have had in respect of that process is that it has been a useful and positive one for departments. Their job as a board is to sift the proposals and to make recommendations as to which are transformative, and to shortlist and prioritise those. As I say, they have written to me at the end of last week in respect of the stage 2 of that process, and I will be considering that and making recommendations to the executive.
You don't believe that the decision or the action to sift 47 projects to 29 was a decision by the Public Sector?
So what the Public Sector Transformation Board was asked to do by the executive was to sift those proposals, to consider them in terms of the objectives of the Transformation Fund, and I'm sure that has been shared with you previously, and to, as I say, shortlist those and make recommendations to me, which I will bring forward to the executive.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Paul Frew is next.
Just on the Transformation Board, Minister, you had stated in a letter 30th of August that you wanted a clear timeline of when to expect conclusions to be reached. Is that what you got last week with regards to the letter from the Transformation Board?
I can't not recall if it was last week's letter or a previous letter, but there was a timeline included.
Yes, there was, and we do have more clarity now also that with the terms of reference agreed now for consultation, the Minister can now engage with Secretary of State, which also would have to be clarified before any release of money. So therefore that was another component of that, but we now have, and there's more detail in the letter that's come to you with that recommendations. But if you like, the parcel now sits with Minister to do that consideration, to take it forward to the executive. So it's now, the ball, so to speak, is in our court for a little bit now until those are considered. Of course, as is always the way, it happens to land on the week when you're trying to do the 25-26 budget. Yes. So it probably hasn't been able to make quite the amount of time in the diary as perhaps we would have hoped.
I know there's priorities. Jane Brady told us on the 25th of November that with regards to the interim board's terms of reference, the development and agreement of these is a matter for the Finance Minister and the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. You alluded to that, Neil. Who's actually in charge?
So the terms of reference have been developed between the board members. They have come to me. And I have brought those to the executive, and the executive has now agreed them from our side of it, and then I will engage with the British Secretary of State on the terms of reference.
So does the Secretary of State make the final call?
No. So we will agree on the terms of reference that the executive has recommended.
And what if the Secretary of State wasn't happy with the terms of reference that was agreed by the executive?
Well, then we would be in a situation where we would have to look at what his specific concerns were, and if they were deal breakers for the executive also. It was very important to me in developing the terms of reference that the decision making and the respecting of devolution was captured within those, and I feel that it has been.
Okay, is there a possibility that the money could be withheld?
Well, we will have to agree on the terms of reference. It's our understanding in advance of the money being released. I don't anticipate us having a difficulty with that. The engagement obviously happened with the members of the Transformation Board, of which the Permanent Secretary of the NIO is one. And as I said, I was satisfied that it's properly reflected within those terms of references that the decision making in respect of how we spend our money and what is considered transformational sits with the executive.
If I may add to that, just to say, I think it's really important, and we will need this committee's ongoing scrutiny and support for trying something a little bit different. Most of the transformation that you'll be aware of goes on all the time within departments. The health budget is enormous. It's doing loads of transformation. This is the attempt to do something just a little bit different, to try and really tease out transformational projects within departments. That's why a lot of it's been badged as interim, etc. And we'll see how this plays in this year. It's a significant amount of money, but in the overall scheme of things, it's a toe in the water of transformation that's needed for all the reasons we've talked about. So although we expect and will welcome very much the scrutiny of that, we're taking it kind of stage by stage, get the terms of reference agreed, get a set of allocations hopefully, and monitor and track those and see if this is a vehicle that could be expanded and could do something more in future, but try to get something fairly small that could work at the beginning and see if this different methodology and approach might work. As the Minister has said, I think now that I've had some feedback, including from my own colleagues, who actually the process has been quite healthy as well, both for officials in terms of presenting and thinking through the benefits realisation, the type of transformation that might be needed, and I think we'll reap some significant benefits for that even as a process, even if the bid, for example, wasn't successful in going through. I've certainly learned a lot as a department that didn't get any through. It's taught me quite a bit about improvements in the way we might articulate the journey of transformation that's needed.
If I could expand on that, Neil, are you saying that the way of doing this thing completely different? Are you talking about the NIO being at the heart of the decision-making process, or are you talking about an interim board to move forward?
No, a little bit more about the interim board and the idea even of having shortened bid documents to allow you to pitch and even come in a I don't want to, other brands are available, so I don't want to mention Dragon's Den, but a type of approach where you have officials trying to pitch an idea that they think will be transformative, getting that quizzing back, if you like, and challenge is different to how we might go about a very long business case process that might take years in gestation. So trying to look at maybe concertina in that, doing it a little bit more nimbly, for want of a better word, but with enough flexibility that allows us to come back and say, is the system and approach working? Do we need to tweak it? So it's really that, the decision making still fundamentally and absolutely lies with the executive, but the idea of how we drive out those type of bids and processes is very, very different, both in its timescale and its approach. And I think there'll have been merit, certainly was for my department, in crafting each of the bids, even if they weren't successful. Indeed, I'm looking at some of them and trying to think of other ways I could find to fund them, because they piqued my interest as ways that DOF could change as well.
Where is the deaths and stillbirths legislation?
Sorry?
Where is the deaths and stillbirths legislation?
Oh, sorry. It's sorry, I didn't catch what you said. Well, and I know you have been updated by colleagues from GRO, and it is in the drafting process with OLC. As I know you've also been updated on, we were keen to use that legislative vehicle to bring forward the baby loss certificate scheme. That obviously took a bit more of development of what was intended to be in that piece of legislation, but I'm keen to see that progress as quickly as possible, not least because the baby loss scheme is included in it, and it's something that I know there is huge support for, both across the Assembly but also out in the public.
We know that the baby loss part will be an enabling clause, so it shouldn't take too much time to concoct that clause up. And then, of course, we know that the other aspects of this should be quite slight in regards to a small number of clauses. So when do you anticipate us getting a first reading?
So my understanding, and I will get officials to clarify this for you, is that we will be hoping to bring the legislation to the Executive in January.
January. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, Paul, Deirdre Hardy.
No, thanks very much for your update. You had mentioned earlier just that there's more utilisation of FTC money. So it's just to see if that's from across departments, because obviously usually we know the likes of DFC and others would use that more. So it's just to get a sense, and also your thoughts on how further that could be utilised in terms of making sure we're maximising the resources that we do have.
I'm going to ask Joanne to maybe speak about the specifics of the bids, because I haven't seen them all yet. But just to reflect that obviously given our very constrained capital position, it's something that I have encouraged all ministers to look at within their own departments if there are potential projects that they could utilise FTC for, and to look at being as imaginative as possible in respect of that. I do think that it is likely that a lot of it was DFC led, but Joanne can comment on that.
Yeah, I think from memory, I don't have the bids in front of me, from memory, I think the majority of it was from DFC, and then there was some from DFE. We're also starting to see the repayments coming back in, so we're looking at net positions at the moment, but yeah, certainly the majority was DFC from memory.
No worries, thank you. And just I suppose on the back of the rating system paper, obviously you brought it to the executive. It's just to ask if there's any outstanding, as a reason maybe for not being placed on the executive, is there any outstanding further information requests or meetings requests from other ministers to discuss the proposals?
No, there's not. There were some further information requests, but all of the information has been provided from memory.
Okay, so there's no other reason then? Okay, and delay. Okay, thank you. The other bit is just around the recent banking roundtable that you've done. So obviously we're doing an inquiry in terms of financial services. So it was just to try and get a flavour of what was discussed, and also if there's areas that you have identified maybe as part of our inquiry work, areas that we could both collectively work on in terms of making representations or a focus of work with the British government in terms of, finances and suppose legislation and where that sits.
Yeah, and the banking roundtable was last week. It was a really useful engagement. We had representatives from the local banks, but also from the Financial Services Union, from the community and voluntary sector, and business organisations locally, and the Consumers Council was in attendance as well. And the Chief Executive of the Financial Conduct Authority had come over for that. And so it was a really useful discussion. The new FC rules around access to cash had come into effect in September. Those rules have been very much welcomed by stakeholders, but I think the feeling and certainly the discussion at the roundtable was that it's a bit too early to draw any significant conclusions around their implementation. And obviously we have slightly different context here in the north, where we have a relatively higher use of cash and our rural landscape, and some of that is captured within the new rules. That issue around financial inclusion was another one that had come up significantly as part of the discussion, and that was reflected both by the Consumers Council, but the community and voluntary representatives that were there as well. And there was people who were in attendance who own post offices and the credit unions. So I think the full landscape was represented in that. What we committed to do as an outworking of the roundtable was to write up a report that will then be shared with Treasury and other regulatory authorities, and I would be hoping that we would then be getting a formal response from them in respect of that, and I'd be happy to share that report with committee in respect of the work that you're doing on that matter as well.
Thanks for that. And I suppose just when we see in our correspondence, looking at the whole issue even around procurement, annually there's anywhere between 2 and 4 billion of procurement to services here, so it's just making sure that we use that money smarter in terms of even social value and outputs to address some of the challenges that we do have in society more broadly. So I think it would be useful to get more engagement on those issues. That feeds into my other point in terms of the work that you've highlighted, because I was going to ask in terms of what further work's being done around the baseline of need. But I suppose and well done in terms of getting us to the point that we are, that is now baselined in at the 124. But going further and obviously looking at the budgets going forward and looking at multi-annual funding, any discussion in terms of how we even target the resources that we have in terms of addressing social needs and inequalities. Because when you look at justice, there was officials recently from health trusts coming in, where they're saying it's the most socially deprived and disadvantaged are the ones in terms of, they're missing hospital appointments, people are actually dying just because of nearly where they live and their postcode in terms of deprivation. So how can we, notwithstanding the budgetary challenges with the money that we have, ensure that we can target that in a better way, and particularly to those who need it most? Is there any appetite, I suppose, across the executive to kind of look at these issues as well, as obviously trying to baseline more of the need with the Treasury?
So on the need bit, first of all, we in the department officials have been working both with other departments but also academics to try and build up that evidence base. I understand they're actually meeting with Professor Jerry Holtham tomorrow around, obviously he did the piece of work in respect of the Welsh approach to need funding, and that is what the Fiscal Council analysis is based on also. So officials have been progressing that, and we, as I say, will be engaging with Treasury on that in the near future. In respect of the issues about how we target our budget and how we ensure that I guess the equality priorities are kind of identified in terms of what we're trying to do. One of the things I suppose that was important to us in respect of the budget for next year is that it does get that full 12-week consultation out in the public, and that departments do have the opportunity on the draft budget to do their own equality considerations, and that then gives us the opportunity to try and reflect that in the final budget as part of the budget sustainability plan as well. The team in the department that is looking at the budget improvement plan we'll be looking at specific areas in relation to equality considerations and how that can be reflected in the budgeting process. So it's something that in the department we are keen that we want to see more work done on. We want to see that properly reflected in the budget going forward. Joanne, do you want to add to anything on that?
No, just to say, as you said, that budget improvement team are looking at how we can incorporate that into the budget going forward, and we're very keen to do the full consultation and to build it in whatever we can in this budget, and probably a bit of an iterative process as we seek to improve going forward.
That would include monitoring the outcomes then in terms of the kind of equality screening, and are you aware at this point that all departments are going to do full EQIAs then in terms of the budget?
Well, it would be a matter for each department once they get their budget settlement to do their equality screening and then do EQIAs. But yes, we would expect them to comply fully with their own equality schemes, and we'll be engaging with the Equality Commission on how we can do things better in relation to the overarching budget.
Okay. My last wee one, sorry, was just on, I know the Transformation Board, and obviously this is a new process for everybody that we're going through, and it's obviously good that we do have the additional money. So it's just really to see what learning there's been until now in terms of making it better as we go forward, and what the feedback from departments have been also.
Yeah, and Neil touched on this a little bit already, but the feedback that we have had from departments has been positive. I guess what I wanted to see out of this approach was that it's something that would encourage that innovative thinking within departments, and to help us take forward that type of transformation that will be needed to ensure our services are more sustainable and efficient. We did encourage departments as part of the process to bring forward more novel proposals, and it was outlined in the initial call that a risk of failure shouldn't preclude proposals coming forward. We wanted to encourage that kind of creative and innovative thinking, and to maximise the opportunities for funding proposals that are going to genuinely deliver on transformation. And I certainly had encouraged the board as well to be flexible in the approach that it took to considering the bids, and to reflect back and to give that feedback. And I think that has been the feedback that we've got from departments is that has been reflected. And as Neil said, again, to steal Joanne's word, it will be a bit of an iterative process in relation to the Transformation Board too. We would anticipate that it will adapt for future rounds of the transformation funding. And what I had also asked Jane, the chair, to look at was how potentially we could widen it out beyond just departments, so that we could involve the community and voluntary sector, we could involve other public sector agencies, and give them the opportunity to work with the departments to bring forward bids that they could see the potential for driving forward transformation.
suppose on the future budgeting piece that Joanne talked about in terms of scoping, the collaborative approach across departments, I suppose learning from that, will that feed into that process as well in terms of doing things more together, you know, and bringing budgets together in terms of outcomes?
I think that's one of the things we'd want to look at as part of that budget improvement plan, is how we can do things more collaboratively. There's I would say probably a huge body of work there to be taken forward.
And it is something that is encouraged as part of the budgetary process. We just haven't seen great uptake in respect of it.
Okay, thank you. And so, if folks indicate if you want to, we may have a chance for people to come back in for one or two more. We've got a few minutes left with the Minister. Just on a couple of points, I do want to press on the position around rates and the broader piece around revenue raising. It would be helpful for us to be clear. So, thankfully, thank you for giving us this indication that you had intended to bring your what was called the short, medium, long-term ratings plans was blocked by the Executive Office. Can you say who in the Executive Office?
It hasn't made the executive agenda, so...
It hasn't made the Executive agenda?
As yet.
As yet, okay. So I'm freewheeling by suggesting it's been blocked from getting on the Executive agenda, but okay, it hasn't been allowed to be discussed yet. So that's rating. That includes the proposal to remove or increase the non-domestic, the domestic rate cap, the 400,000 cap. Are there other, I presume there are other measures in that as well? And are they part of the broader 113 million revenue raising exercise or not?
No, they are not part of what was laid out in the budget sustainability plan in respect of the 113 million, which we are on target to meet quite comfortably. We have raised, as you will be aware, or we will raise in the course of this financial year 80 million, and then there is a projection that we will hit that 113 over the course of next year.
So it's 80 million this year, and then you'll make up the balance and a bit more next year. And separate to that is the rating, your view of how you could reform the rating system, and then the longer term view, albeit you're not willing, fair enough, yet to say what you think could be the case in terms of fiscal devolution. But just can I ask, on the 113 million, the budget sustainability plan contains an appendix which sets out a table, some of which are operating of charges, AFBI charges for testing, ordnance survey fees. So some of the revenue raising is an inflationary increase for charges or products that are sold by different bits of the devolved state. Are all of those are things that are happening, the things that are in that appendix? Or are they just options?
And I don't have the table in front of me, so forgive me if I reflect this wrong, and Neil can come in and correct me. The 24-25 are things I assume that have been actioned. The 25-26 are the potential ones and decisions that ministers will have to take, and I think it states clearly in the budget sustainability plan that those will be subject to decisions of ministers. And one of the measures obviously that's in there is the regional rate, which will be a decision that will be made by the executive, which will contribute to that total as well. But I just to be clear on the 113 million, like the grand total of what we do as an executive in terms of generating revenue isn't to meet the requirements of Treasury's 113 million, which was a condition of the financial package that the executive didn't agree with in the first place, but it's about delivering public services and quality public services and trying to fund those. So as part of the budget sustainability plan, we did commit to a strategic consideration of income generation, and we will continue to look at that also.
And I would personally, and I think others in the committee would encourage that in the sense to see some even more ambition on that. One of the things in that table is ironically car parking charges. So £6 million, there's calculated to be £6 million of additional income from hospital car parking charges, which I think is simply not proceeding with the legislation that was introduced in 2022, and that's one of the I think I'm right in saying, correct me if I'm wrong, part of the 113 million is not proceeding with the Hospital Car Parking Charges Act.
So it's not a case that it wasn't proceeded with, it had to be changed to allow for the implementation of it to be taken forward. So somebody can keep me right on this, but it was in place for 2 years.
Yes. And so you score, that revenue has been scored as part of the 113 million, the delay. So is it your view that it should be that it should never be introduced, that the act should never be commenced then?
The Act was, the amendments were introduced to allow for the implementation of the car parking, the removal of the car parking charges.
But
That's within the consideration of that as part of the 113 million. Well, the 113 million ends at the end of 25-26. It will be
that's my question.
I guess what I would say in respect of it is that will be a decision for the health minister to take, because that income generation falls within his department.
But I suppose the point I'm getting to is, if this is about long-term budget sustainability, and in the budget sustainability plan, your department has said we are scoring £6 million from this act that we passed, for better or worse, not being implemented. Is your view, as Finance Minister now, who is planning for long-term budget sustainability, that in 26 we should simply implement that act and therefore lose that £6 million? Because that would, I suppose, it might reinforce the idea that we aren't really serious about budget sustainability.
So, and I can't remember the exact terms of the legislation that was used to amend the removal of the car parking charges legislation, but from understanding it was to delay the implementation of it for 2 years, to allow for the necessary works to be done. So it's not something that was intended to go on in perpetuity. It was intended to have an end point.
I suppose my question is more about the contradiction between allowing that bill to come into force when it's part of the budget sustainability plan now is to not introduce it, and then allowing it to introduce in 26. But
it's not that it's part of the budget sustainability plan, it's part of the income that will be used to meet the 113 million.
It's in an appendix to the budget, but I take your point. Just on a couple of other points, Minister. Sorry.
No, I was just going to come in. I think, yes, you're right. It's in the appendix to the budget sustainability plan, but there are two separate issues here. There are how the executive makes its budget sustainable, which is that ongoing review of income charges, and then there is the requirement which was placed upon the executive by the financial restoration package. That is setting out how we meet that requirement that the UK government placed on the executive to meet the 113 million. That does not necessarily say that that is what the executive intends to do going forward. That's part of the wider review.
Fine. I think people will see a contradiction there, but I respect the position you set out. On NI Water, do you think NI Water's funding model is sustainable?
Well, I suppose what I would say to you is, first and foremost, that's a matter for the infrastructure minister. He has set out his view in respect of that. I think we all recognise the challenges that NI Water face in respect of its funding. I think what we would say is that the bulk of that is due to underfunding of public services and capital infrastructure over a number of years. And again, I would say it's an executive priority to ensure that our wastewater infrastructure does get sufficient funding, and we have, as part of the budgetary process and the monitoring rounds, tried to put additional funding towards NI Water. So you are not endorsing a plan for developer charges? That's one of the things he's put forward. Has that been discussed with the Finance Department? Well, the infrastructure minister says that is one of the things that he is looking at. Obviously, he'll have to bring proposals forward in respect of that. I want to bring in some colleagues briefly before we release you. Diane for South once again.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Minister, for your answers here so far today. Last week we had the HR section of your department here in committee, and obviously it's one of those things where you've got the core delivery on the budget and the finances, but it's that oversight role in the wider civil service. And I was wondering if you could outline your plans for civil service reform.
So. And I know that you will have been briefed by officials in respect of both the people plan, the 1 year people plan and the 5 year people strategy. And so that's a piece of work that is ongoing, and the various HR policies are being looked at in respect of that. And I have ongoing engagement with officials in relation to the people strategy. Neil, do you want to add anything in relation to the strategy?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge underpinning. If we're really going to have the type of transformation and change that we all recognise is needed, it's going to come from our people. So having a strategy that supports them, supports the type of training, development that they will need, looks at pay strategies, professions reviews, and I know you've been briefed on that. So there's a whole reform which keeps our people, ultimately our core resource, at the heart of that. But in order to drive that change forward, we also want to do that with our people. So there's been a lot of consultation involved, lots of great ideas coming forward about ways we could be more efficient and effective. And of course, from my side, it means running as effective and efficient an HR service as we can too, which also requires investment, change and transformation. And you've heard from some of the people leading that change. But one other important component of this is a timing issue as well with the Integrate system. We'll be moving into a new phase of that development next year. And it's important we know what type of policy framework we're going to have by then. So there's an urgency there on looking at some of the policies, procedures and how we're going to deal with a number of matters. But you can see many of the concerns we see around our workforce in terms of retention, attraction, sickness levels, lots of things that require significant both investment and thought. So it's a big programme. I often jest with the Minister that her early year has been so much focused on budget matters and challenges, but fundamentally the transformation of the service is going to require changes around procurement, it's going to require people changes, and so a big focus for us for the year ahead, all being well, will be really driving forward that people agenda. And Jill Min and her team looking at the 5-year strategy, and Catherine and her team looking at all the operational improvements. I'm very confident that we'll be seeing significant improvement. I think reflecting on the commentary you had from Catherine, I think it is important to say that some of the challenges we face today on the people side, I hold a responsibility for. There was decisions I took when we didn't have ministers in place, delaying recruitment, pausing campaigns, simply to try and meet the budget pressures faced at the time. They have a consequence, and you're seeing that, and colleagues in other departments are seeing the backlog that was partly brought in by decisions I took some time ago. It's such a long-moving process that there is some consequences for those decisions that I took.
I suppose we have a few more minutes in the Minister's time, so I'm keen to get as many people in as possible. Yes,
one
absolutely.
more. It was just around that HR piece, and in terms of hybrid working in the civil service. So, you know, I have a lot of people get in touch with me about concerned about how this is rolled out and how every department's doing something a little bit different. So I just wondered in terms of the centralisation of it. So whenever I'd asked the Minister through written questions before, it seemed to be that it was just up to line management and how that was managed. But I just wanted to ask in terms of systematically, is there anything central to say how you know and how you monitor how many days people are in the office, how many times they're logging on, and how that's fed back, just for a term of oversight and governance in and around what's actually happening in terms of hybrid working, the public perception of the civil service?
Yes, the hybrid policy is under review at the moment. We're hoping to bring some new policy to try and bring some consistency across the system early in the new year. I think it's worth me saying, you know, my personal reflection, looking at my own staff in a department that's been hugely under pressure budget-wise, is that they're under tremendous stress and strain. And actually, my style of management and line management has not been feeling the need to be able to observe them to ensure that they're delivering. It's rather through proper performance management. So I've always been a strong advocate of hybrid working and the flexibility it brings. We're not as competitive in the labour market now as from a salary point of view, so it's important to have other things to attract workers. But it is important to have the right governance and oversight, and business need varies right across the service. Some people need to be in all the time. But to answer your question, there is a review of that hybrid policy going on as part of our policy review, and we're hoping to be bringing a new consistent policy in the new year.
You're not actually reporting at the minute how many days in different departments people are in and how many days people are out to be able to have that centrally?
No, and funny, we've looked at some technology solutions as to whether we could do that, and we don't actually have the capabilities at this point.
As I say that, we do have the luxury of being able to hold Neil and Joanne for a couple more minutes, which we don't have with the Minister. So I just will suggest that Jerry, if you have one final quick question you indicate to the Minister.
Quick, Minister. I mean, I think there's a contradiction between saying, and it's been your directive for a while, about balancing budgets, but also prioritising workers' pay. You can't do both. And I think I'd say Treasury, short-term economics. So I've asked you sort of in different guises, but kind of to put on record again, and a few of your officials proposed a corporate wealth tax to the Chancellor. It could bring in tens of billions of pounds every single year. So conscious of that being an important question.
So, and what I was saying in relation to the bit about balancing our budgets and prioritising public sector pay is, I don't think it's a contradiction. I think we need to prioritise within our budgets, and every minister has a responsibility to look at how they do balance up their pressures with that desire and need to ensure that workers are properly recompensed. So I don't see that as a contradiction in terms we, as I say, have significant engagement with Treasury on an ongoing basis, and I guess we don't make the decisions about what proposals that the Chancellor takes forward in respect of how she balances her books, and I think some of the decisions that have been made in respect of the budget this year haven't been ones that we would necessarily have made. And what I have reflected in my engagement with Treasury is those with the broadest shoulders, those who can most afford it, should be those who are shouldering the burden and those who are paying.
Okay, I'm going to move on. Let a couple of others in before we let the Minister go. Steve Aiken,
Yeah,
did you
very
have one
quick
quick one?
Thanks, Minister. Look, it was just about a year ago that Neil was telling us the world was going to collapse in on us and how bad the financial situation was when we were all sitting around various places in Hillsborough. But the figures we now have are close on sort of 80% of the funding that you said we were going to need. We've probably got to that position now. So projecting ahead, what's the quantum we need over the next couple of years? Because you were fairly exact in the figures we had. Minister, how much are we going to have to raise over the next 2 to 3 years to be able to achieve the level of service we have? Because we had very good figures a year ago. So we should be in a position where we can say, what is the quantum we need to raise and get to now?
Can I just ask, Steve, are you asking the Minister, do we need more additional revenue raising?
No, what is the
shortfall between the block
What is the
grant?
difference? What is the difference? What is the quantum?
It was quite a bit of work to produce those kind of estimates back then, so and you'll
We're very accurate, Neil.
Yeah. I have a patchy forecasting track record, as you know, Steve. But
you can wait until off the record to say that. To admit that.
Yeah, yes, perhaps. But we haven't done the updated work of the precise numbers. We have to balance what departments both ask from a need point of view, and I think the most difficult and challenging position at the minute is expectations around pay, which are clearly, we had some indications at that time what they would be. We obviously don't know what those implications will be.
I'm going to bring in Philip Brent. Can I just suggest to members, I'm literally just going to give a couple of people a chance to ask quick questions of the Minister, and I think the Minister's best place to ask her strategic and political questions. Not that she can't do sums, but it's we have Neil and Joanne
Are
who
you
are probably better
currently
placed to
working
answer
on
questions. Philip
any
Brent.
support through your department, be it through rates relief for others for businesses here in Northern Ireland for the next financial year?
So, as you would expect, and I'm sure all of you will have had similar correspondence, I have had representations from various business organisations in respect of the different challenges that they are facing and the different outworkings of the budget, national insurance contributions, increase in minimum wage, which I'm sure we would all ideologically support, but it will put a challenge on businesses and representations in respect of rate and policy decisions that were taken in Britain. As you will also appreciate, we do still have a very constrained budget, and in terms of any interventions that could be made, that has to be balanced against our need to deliver public services. I will be meeting with various of the business organisations in the near future to hear of their challenges and what their specific asks might be. But obviously all of that has to be taken in the context of our own budgetary challenges.
Caitlin Tennyson.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, you referred earlier to the fact that there's a small fiscal team working on relative need and tax devolution of about 2 or 3 officials, but we also know that you didn't allocate your own department any additional resource in October monitoring. Is that not a false economy given the repercussive impacts of that small team's work for the wider executive budget?
So I think, and I don't often reflect on my own department's budget, but it has been very, very challenging, and Neil and I have these conversations exactly as what you have posed to us. I guess we do have a need to live within our own budget, and we have to balance that against all of the other departmental asks and budgetary pressures as well. And certainly we are looking at our resource, and we did create that budgetary team, that both the fiscal team and the budget improvement team. Neil, do you want to say something
just
about
to
the
say,
operational end
it's
of
not
that?
necessarily, we've got to balance up, would throwing more people at it have helped, and I'm not sure, I'm very confident in the skills and the talent of the people that we have, but we also have to have the audience to receive the work, and Treasury have their hands full too. So the idea that we'd have been able to open that any earlier or have any, I don't think we've missed out on anything, and I would be the first to tell you and to indicate to the Minister in the bids, if I felt I had a bigger team, I could influence, or we could have more information more readily accessible that Treasury would take on board. There are very few people we mentioned Jerry Hotham earlier, very few people with the expertise to look at the very particular issues. And indeed within the service, I'm very confident with Aidan and the team that he has and Jeff and his team that we've the right people. So actually, although I worry about the resource that we have to deliver in many areas, I'm sure we could talk about, I actually don't think that's an area in which if I'd had a cohort of extra people, mysteriously, I'd have been able to get the ones with the right skill to accelerate this work. It's very niche and very specific type of public expenditure work. So although I think it's a very valid question, I as accounting officer am content that small as it is, it's the right size for now, not to say that we won't need some more people and with plans for that as the budget sustainability and the fiscal. I think one thing it's very important to say is the fiscal framework is shouldn't be thought of as an end date type conversation. There is one to be signed, but not everything will be agreed by then. Treasury wouldn't have the capacity to deal with all of those questions. We'll have to have ongoing engagement, and that's why we've set up a team, because we intend that to be an ongoing programme of work.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the Minister needs to leave now. Can I thank you for your time, Minister? There's lots, we appreciate you covering all those areas, and some things to follow up on. Can I suggest that we hold, I'm afraid Joanne and Neil are going to be held in manacles for a little bit longer, just to cover. Thank you, Minister, for your time. We're going to just, with the officials, one or two other factual points, and obviously members indicate you don't have to, but there were one or two other factual things, and I think obviously keen to get the political and strategic views of the Minister. Where are we on police holiday pay, McLeod, and one other, the PSNI data breach money, which I know has been floating around in the ether, and I think we asked at the beginning of November, but we didn't have an answer. Do we know how much that's going to set us back?
Well, I think that the Justice Minister is on record of saying what she estimates the cost being to her departments, but I think the important thing to realise is that the holiday pay and the McLeod will actually impact on many other departments, and we don't have an overall figure for either the quantum of that, nor do we know when exactly that will crystallise. So I suppose the quantum is as yet unknown. Minister has been very clear, and I would agree with her assessment, is that is something that is exceptional and that we would be seeking a reserve claim for it. So once it becomes clear what the number is and when it will crystallise, then we will be approaching the Treasury. Okay. We have made Treasury aware of the issues, and as I say, I believe Minister has said that the response back was from the Treasury, you've got a significant amount of money in the recent autumn budget, you should be able to manage that within. But actually, when you look at their own criteria and statement of funding policy for a reserve claim, I think this matches it very well.
It is. We were told, I think, at the beginning of this month that it was hundreds of millions, and that hasn't changed. It's still hundreds of millions. Is it closer to $1 billion or zero?
Yeah, we're always very cautious because obviously there's discussions to be had as to figures, so we don't like to lead that discussion in that way, but it is of that kind of quantum.
Okay. On the question, so now I have to say the Minister gave us an answer that had lots of information. I'm not sure I always completely understood it, but just so I understand it, the executive at some point will discuss what are called short, medium and long-term proposals for the rating system. That is not now going to include 25-26 because it's too late to change rates for but there still could be that doesn't mean the regional rate can't be increased. And indeed, the budget sustainability plan, I believe, and the 113 million being met relies upon a 4%, or that it assumes the budget sustainability plan assumes 4%. For the purposes of options.
But there are options there, and it depends on the revenue that you raise from other sources. So that is a discussion that will happen as part of the executive's consideration of the budget for 25-26.
There's a grand total of 62 million that are in the options in the budget sustainability plan, and that comes on top of I've now forgotten the numbers, but those come on top of the amount that was raised this year by various different things, including the regional rate rise. So there's a suite of options there to pick from. So the idea is the budget that in order to meet the 113 million, the executive will pick from those, or the finance minister will make a recommendation.
No, I mean, there are options put forward there, but things change all the time. So the executive could make a range of options. I think from memory, we have to find about 33 million in 25-26. So there's obviously a range of options for doing that. And while the budget sustainability plan gave an idea of what those options are, it doesn't say that it has to be those, there could be other things. So it's something that's probably better considered by the executive as part of its overall consideration of the budget 25-26.
Very crudely, 1% on rates is about £8 million. So
It was often said, or it was said a lot, I remember, at the beginning of when we all returned in February, that the revenue raising, quote, part of the restoration package was going to be unbelievably penal and brutal and very difficult to find. That's not to say that the rates increase will not have been noticeable, but I don't think it has been hugely, I don't think it has been, I'm not trivialising it, but I don't think it has been hugely, overwhelmingly difficult. And certainly when I look at what's in that table in the Budget Sustainability Plan Annex, some of them they're a collection of relatively routine, benign things like uprating charges with inflation.
Yeah, when the restoration package was agreed at the start, it had that happening within 1 year.
Yeah.
You know, it's now been spread over 2 years, which has allowed different decisions to be taken, and obviously been ongoing engagement with
I certainly don't think anyone would want them to be penal. I mean, you'd want to do the least that you would need to do. And certainly I know businesses would articulate that any of those pressures have been quite difficult and challenging. But as the Minister articulated at the time of last year's decision making, you're always balancing up the rate or the cost that could be managed without jeopardising the rate space. And one of the most positive indicators has been a continued growth in the rate space, which if you want, indicates that the level was challenging but manageable. Too significant an increase, which is something we articulated strongly at the time and the Minister strongly advocated, was the type of rates increases that you were seeing in local government councils in England, for example, would be detrimental to the rate space here and therefore not generate the income. So it's always a balance to strike, but we have certainly looked, as I think is the right thing to do, for every potential option that can score against that requirement. But as Joanne indicated, that's a very distinct and separate thing from the conversation about income generation or revenue raising.
But isn't there a slight contradiction there? So you just said, Neil, that you want to do. You didn't say you want to do as little as possible. You want to at least pay, the least
causes least harm.
The least harm, and that's fair enough. But there are different things. There's 113 million, which is revenue raising over 2 years. Then there are broad aspirational statements from the Minister and officials and some others around broadening the tax base and new fiscal levers, but we appear to be stuck on the first part and kind of very, very tentative about even talking about some of that, and we can't even get some of these modest changes to the rating system onto the executive agenda. But by definition, broadening any tax base will involve shock horror taxing people businesses, organisations who would probably rather not be taxed. So, I mean, will we ever get will we ever get to a position where we actually do have substantive proposals around new fiscal powers or more ambitious revenue raising, which is some of what I was trying to get at earlier on? So I'm intrigued to know how that work is happening within the department.
Well, certainly, I mean, I can't speak to what makes the agenda or not, and as the Minister articulated, she had certainly proposed a paper that included measures, and other ministers may well be reflecting on their own decisions too, and we certainly as a team provide the evidence research as required. And I mentioned those small fiscal teams focus at the moment, 124, the mechanics of that's much more complex than we could explain today, or in fact that I could do justice to make sure we don't get a funding agreement that doesn't work or something that has been overlooked or not considered. And then that team will be deployed at, there'll be options for the Minister to consider, and we will then provide that research or evidence on whatever those revenue raising or income generation measures might be, but it'll be the Minister's prerogative as to which one she asks us to pursue.
So we know we're at some point, or we hope at some point, there will be a discussion about the rating policy, the short, medium and long-term rating policy decisions, but that's not the same thing as the other bigger revenue raising work. That might never happen.
And it's not all of it sits within, obviously, the Department of Finance's remit.
Okay. Just bring a couple of others. Jerry Carroll wanted to come in.
Thanks. Maybe I don't really get a chance to hone in on this because the Minister's time is limited, but in terms of go back to the procurement contracts, I mean, there's a question specifically about Fujitsu, but also the general, powers of the department. So can the Minister, can the department kind of overrule, block, intervene in contracts because there's a concern about a particular company, and there's been obviously various issues raised in particular about Fujitsu, but in general terms, is there a power of that magnitude at the disposal of the Minister or the Department?
No, not to the best of my knowledge that we don't have a step-in power. We do have, contractors can be excluded from lists bidding for future work. But for example, contractors may be involved, as the one that you mentioned is, in providing payroll, etc. So there's obviously important services they deliver day to day. We monitor that contract, ensure performance. But in terms of, we abide by the procurement contracts regulations, and we don't provide that exclusion. And to my knowledge, I don't have any power to step in to say to a specific supplier.
I appreciate also if there's any, maybe look at that and come back to committee if there's any powers to be keen to sort of hone in on that a bit further. And I mean, obviously, given the fact that the EA, as my understanding, have backtracked or sort of re-looked at their contract with Fujitsu, I mean, is there any further work? I think the Minister said no. From my understanding of her answer, is there any further work being done to say, because there's serious concern about this organisation and serious questions about whether they should be getting any public money, never mind new contracts, and there was a standoff with the Department of Health, I believe, the last time we were discussing this. So is there any further work being done to kind of review the department awarding contracts?
No, I'm not at this point in time doing anything other than managing the contracts we have and managing procurement by the regulations, and so nothing in the Department of Finance is treating that differently, and I'm not over the detail of the decisions that DE made.
Okay.
Okay, Jerry. So Steve, you can.
Yeah, just a couple of ones. Thanks very much indeed, and so it's both to Joanne and Neil for you. Obviously, it's very good to see that FTC people are making more use of it. But I haven't heard the Minister mention anything about accessing the National Wealth Fund or looking towards GB Energy as a potential sort of source for funding. And the one thing that hasn't been mentioned, but obviously the Chancellor has been quite keen to do, has been to tap into the local government pension funds. Are we doing anything along these lines? Are we pushing to tap into these national resources, or indeed are we talking to the local government pension fund for potential investment in infrastructure?
We're obviously engaging with the Treasury on what we can do in terms of National Wealth Fund, etc. Local Government Pension Fund hasn't been something that I have picked up on, so we can look at that, but I think it would be probably very challenging for us to do that, different from the British Government to do that, and ourselves, restricted. Even with the National Wealth Fund, we need to look at how that impacted on our budgets, etc. So I don't think anything there is going to offer a quick solution, but we will look at all opportunities.
Important piece of the work of the department, though, you touch on is broadening the funding portfolio. I mean, I think we've discussed the 124 a lot, and there are very particular areas we can look at, and justice in particular areas. But there will be very strong arguments deployed against that too. In a region with 1.9% unemployment, it's not. Let's put it this way: it's not a penalty kick that you would be able to easily argue. It's hard to argue for 124. So we shouldn't have all the eggs in that basket as a funding answer. We need to be thinking about all revenue, and we're certainly engaged in each and every one of those potential schemes that could free up or provide an alternative source. And that all, of course, is coupled with the transformation work. We need to get the cost of delivering down, as well as looking for other sources of funding.
Follow up, Joanne. I was interesting when I mentioned the National Wealth Fund. You obviously winced a bit, so you've obviously had.
Wasn't where I had.
Yeah.
You're getting as good at reading Joanne as well. I can tell.
So obviously we've already started those sort of conversations. Is there any discussion about, with the other regions as well, about having a combined approach to look at sort of the National Wealth Fund? And I know GB Energy have approached me and said we want to invest. We have to invest in Northern Ireland, but we don't know what to invest in, and nobody's asked us. So it seems to be quite a strange position where we want extra funds. Government is looking for methods of giving us extra funds, and what we're doing about it.
There haven't been a great deal of discussions that I've been involved in. It's just sort of touched on the periphery of it. Certainly we talk to Scotland and Wales all the time about things we could make joint approaches on, but there's nothing really to be said at this point in time on it. The wincing was probably because there have been issues before where the GB Bank, etc., where we were told it would actually count against our RI borrowing. So we need to be very careful about what we do and how it impacts on the rest of our budget and those. But yeah, they're discussions. Scotland and Wales we talk to regularly about a range of things.
Through the Chair, if you have any correspondence that comes from the National Wealth Fund, I'd be really interested.
We have a briefing on very opposite. We have a briefing on that next week. Okay, the next person is Diane.
Thank you very much. And thanks for you staying on to answer a few more questions. With the increase in the overcommitment sitting at, there was at 831 million during the year, and as we'd already said, with Sorry. As been already said previously, with the level up overcommitments, the monitoring round didn't really offset it. Is there a path to breaking even in 24-25?
The numbers you're looking at the minute, the last forecast outturn that the committee have, are actually based before the October monitoring round has happened. So I would hope that once departments have factored in the October monitoring round, the next forecast outturn you get will show that reducing significantly. Departments were left with overcommitments of 180 million after October monitoring. Also, of course, each department was told that they will now have to live within that position, so we'd hope that we'd start to see that filtering through into the forecast outturn. So I suppose really what I'm saying is watch out for the next one coming in, and then that's the one where we might raise concerns if it hasn't come down considerably.
Do you expect there to be a path to break even 24-25 from those?
There absolutely should be. Unfortunately, a large component of departments' overcommitments was public sector pay. And while we're all very keen to do what we can in public sector pay, ultimately, when it comes to breaking even, they'd be considered a discretionary cost. So there's a challenge for departments to balancing their budget against doing what they can.
Yeah, it's been a very strong statement the Minister's made, is about one of the things when we think about multi-year budgets and long-term planning is to get away from that idea that pay commitments could be a residual or a balancing that's disrespectful to our staff. It's the wrong way to run any organisation. So the intention is to move as swiftly as you can to knowing what pay pressures are as you commence the year. Now, sometimes that's very difficult because the pay bodies that don't recommend before the year starts, but certainly in the bits that were within the Minister's control around her own pay bill, she's been very clear with me about her intention, and Joanne, to get ahead of that in future years and actually start to think about that as you would consider the regional rate, as you would consider all of your pressures before the year begins. It's a terribly uncomfortable position for Joanne and I here sitting here thinking that the way to the path to fiscal sustainability is how you constrain your pay bill. That's not given that we're 8 months through and people have done all that hard work for this 8 months on the back. It's not the way you should operate, and we hope to be in a position that as we look to multi-year budgeting and better budget sustainability, you consider your pay bill costs right at the beginning. This has been a particularly difficult era for that, with pay body recommendations coming out mid-year much higher than historic ones had been, and that's why we're in that difficult position. So Joanne's actually right. From a technical sense, we can see a route forward. But for many, including the Minister, it's a very uncomfortable one.
With so much moving around with all of that, and with this package and all the reporting for 24-25, it just feels there are a lot of moving pieces, so it will be difficult to report concisely probably on the financial restoration package on that. And obviously moving, as you say, I agree with you, like piecing together pay awards through monitoring rounds is not where anybody wants to be. And then as we're moving into 25-26, we're already under pressure going forward, and now we've got the increased national insurance employers' contributions to be built into that, and then not knowing how much of that's going to be funded going forward. And I would disagree slightly with the chair. He said about the rates increased last year, not causing huge issues. In some councils it really did, because the council contribution was significant in many of those, and I'm just very conscious of employers' contributions across the councils are estimated to be over £10 million, and councils facing the pressure to raise that themselves. So just to be crystal clear, it'll only be the central government departments.
I didn't say they weren't significant. Overall, the rates increase was significant for it. But anyway, go on ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So no, just to be crystal clear, any Treasury support that is provided for public sector increase in national insurance contributions would only be for government departments. It's not for local government. It's not for arm's length bodies.
Yeah, I mean, the support to the public sector, we'll get Barnett on the allocations made to Whitehall departments. Arm's length bodies that fall within the central government would fall within that support. But again, the Barnett is an issue for us. Our public sector is bigger than it is in England.
Thanks for that clarity.
Okay, no problem. Philip Brett.
Chair, just to go back in relation to the paper the Finance Minister had discussed in relation to reforming of rates, why has the Department not gone out to consultation on this? You don't need executive approval to go out to have a consultation exercise by the Department.
We're working through that now. It was actually our understanding and advice that I had that would have been needed given the cross-cutting nature of some of the proposals. So it was our understanding that would have been needed. We're now exploring whether it would be possible to do so without that.
So previously this issue has arisen, and the Attorney General's advice was quite clear that the Department for Finance had the ability to go out to consultation on this issue. So when did you seek advice if you could go out to consultation without executive?
On the fact that it hadn't been coming onto the agenda, we then started to explore, and as lead official, I went back and said, look, what else can we look at? Is there ways we can take it forward? So, I had looked at it and thought that was something that would have required. So we're now exploring that, Philip.
When did you start that exploration process?
Once we knew we weren't going to then make it for the time frame that would be required to bring them in for the next fiscal year, means that therefore we need to think of other ways that we can take forward that type of consultation. But you can understand the interest in wanting to have a conversation about what the proposed measures were, to have an executive conversation about those, to go out and consult on things, that there was there had been a discussion about what was coming rather than bringing it out as a surprise. So that was why I provided that advice to the Minister. But we are absolutely looking at whether, thinking ahead, whether it's now feasible to just consult on whatever measures. I think the Minister was very keen to have an executive conversation about the type of measures she wanted to bring forward.
Sure, but obviously that delay and not going out to consultation, which the Minister was entitled to do, has now meant that we've missed this deadline. Would it not have been better practice that the Department sought that advice in terms of its ability to go to consultation before the deadline for next year had passed?
Yeah, no, I take that criticism. It's something I need to think about. I'll have to be honest, when providing advice to the Minister, the thought that it wouldn't be discussed hadn't actually entered my mind, so I'm now aware of that, and the next time I might provide a different approach. So, no, I take that criticism.
Okay, that's great. One or two final points for me. On FTC, you may have seen we had a discussion in the Assembly last week about potential use of FTC, one of which was suggested by me and brothers, and the Minister had a useful engagement on it, is using it to fund regeneration projects. Now, obviously, there would be different mechanisms. Would it theoretically be possible, and I'm not asking you to say about one specific project, that would be, but would it theoretically be possible, do you think, to create an entity, a corporation, which could take hold of a parcel of land, perhaps in the northern city centre of Belfast, in Mr. Brett's constituency, for the purposes of regeneration? Would that theoretically, I mean, it wouldn't be an impossible thing to do as long as it was designed in the right way?
I think it would be complicated, and there'd be a number of issues that would have to be considered in doing that. I mean, would the body be set up simply as a funding vehicle? Would it own or vest the property? While the land might require the department having to purchase the site, setting up an entity to use FTC is very complicated. It has to be private sector, which means there can be literally no government control over it. So it's a very complicated. So we're always happy to look at all proposals, but I don't think you could underestimate how complicated it would be. And we also would need to look at, would creating such a vehicle actually solve the issues, or are there wider issues? Is it funding that's the problem, or is it something else?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that could be part of the problem, but I think, anyway, but complicated is not no.
No, complicated is not no. We're always happy to look at
and of course it would be, well, they're always, and of course, but we understand it because it's complicated. Okay, thank you very much. We're hoping to hear back from you about...
I was just going to make a quick remark. Maybe we could get with Ulster University. They're very good at using lots and lots of FTC.
Okay, point duly noted. We are hoping to have, if there is an executive discussion on the 25-26 budget, we will hopefully get details of that in sharp order, and then we'll hopefully have your colleagues back to hear from that and scrutinise that, and there'll be lots in that. Okay. Thank you very much at this point. Thank you, Joanne. Neil, we appreciate you staying back and giving us further evidence. It's much appreciated.
A quick one for the clerk and the chair.
Yes.
So if the budget goes in front of the executive next week and gets signed off next week, so that means the consultation period starts immediately then?
We would expect, yeah.
So we could still meet the...
I think it starts once the we don't have the officials, we could have asked them, but I presume it starts once it
I already thought about it after he left.
Yeah, I know. I presume, shout back, I presume it starts when it's published.
Yeah.
So we could make the timeline.
We could still make the timeline, Chair. Yeah.
Just.
Okay.
Just about.
Okay, members, so I do want to go back now to...
So, Chair, we have officials ready
Yeah.
and they're on their way in.
Yeah, great.
So if
This
we
is-
can move to that first and then we'll
Let's
do
do that. Okay, let's do that. Okay, so members, we are now going to our next oral briefing, which is from the Departmental Solicitor's Office, and I should seek agreement as I should retrospectively should seek agreement for the previous evidence system because I don't think I did. That presumably everyone was agreed to that we record the minister's session via Hansard and that we will record this session via Hansard. So at page 437 of the meeting pack, there's a clerk's memo on this item, and at page 22 of the table pack is a departmental briefing paper, which wasn't provided for in time for the main pack, but it is there. There's some additional papers there, which you can see. The briefing was scheduled in order for us to better understand the capacity the DSO has, and they've given up some of their time because they've been waiting patiently while we had evidence from the minister. They are here to give us a briefing on their capacity and decisions around temporary measures, but also to elaborate on the decisions made around temporary measures surrounding the registration of deaths and stillbirths and how those might be made permanent through new legislation, which is something that we have talked about before. So welcome Joanne Timoney, who's Deputy Departmental Solicitor at the DSO, and Ross Thompson, who's a director within DSO, and we'll invite Joanne to make a brief opening statement. When I say brief, I don't mean that to be rude, it's purely so that we can get to questions and talk to you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to the committee for having us here this afternoon. We understand that the committee wishes us to speak to this particular matter, but also that you have concerns, some concerns outside of this, beyond the actual particular matter. So what we're proposing to do today is for Ross to speak to this matter, and for myself to address those two concerns in relation to capacity generally. Whether or not you wish me to go first, or Ross, I'll take your opinion.
Could I suggest, do you want to go first on the specifics of the bill? Yeah.
Yes.
Or do Ross do the specifics of the bill and you're going to do broader pressures?
Yes.
Okay. So Ross, if you want to do the specifics of the...
The bill is well underway. We don't have too much role in the development of the bill. Now it's with OLC and the department. Our involvement came in the secondary legislation when I referred to it in the briefing there with the Red Book that sets out the different rules.
Just for the purposes, because I think it's something for the purpose of public information, in case anybody's watching this who doesn't know the difference.
Yes.
Can you want to explain in brief the difference between the DSO and the OLC, the Departmental Solicitor's Office and the Office for Legislative Counsel? Because even for some MLAs, it's the kind of thing that isn't often unpacked in clear terms.
Yeah, no problem.
So if you could
The Office of Legislative Counsel are based actually in this building. They're drafters. Usually they're lawyers by trade who then transition to become drafters. They would have been called draftsmen or draftsmen prior to gender neutral language. They write primary legislation, which are bills that are debated in this place and then become law. Departmental Solicitor's Office in Northern Ireland support departments, the government departments, the core departments, in the scrutiny of secondary legislation, which is subordinate legislation. That's legislation that only has status because the bill or the act gives it some sort of status, gives you a department of power to pass secondary legislation. So ordinarily there would be the big sort of framework would be in the bill and how it's implemented, or what sort of like the operating of certain figures or fees are all done through secondary legislation. So in Northern Ireland, in this jurisdiction, departments are responsible for the drafting of their own secondary legislation. They provide a copy of that to DSO for scrutiny and for review. We then give the clearance, and then it's laid in the Assembly, and then statutory committees are supported by the Examiner of Statutory Rules, who then will advise committee on whether or not it's within VARAs or in proper form and so on.
So you don't have an automatic role in all primary legislation?
No. From time to time we prepare a competence assessment. So Northern Ireland Assembly is created by primary legislation from the UK Parliament. There are certain areas, you'll be well aware of this, but for people at home maybe, or anybody watching, there are certain things we can't legislate on. And you'll see with the Media House thing recently, where there was a human rights consideration, the Human Rights Act, a judge decided that that was outside competence, and so that legislation was a portion of that legislation was disapplied. And so that's DSO's role, is to try and provide a competence assessment, and also the Attorney General's Office has a role there as well.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. I'll let you get back to me in a second if that will seem basic. Hopefully, people here. But did you have? I think you had a bit more around the details or not?
Particular matter.
But just, I put it in the briefing what we says happened. So I'm really happy to discuss what's in the briefing.
Well, in that case, we'll go straight to questions. I think we've got Diane first, the Deputy Chair, and then Paul Frew.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks for outlining the difference in the two of those, because I think it's really important just to get that clarity, because I think whenever we're looking at it and we're asking questions, we just think DSOs doing everything there, and I just wanted to speak just in and around the adequacy of staffing and resourcing across both DSO and OLC.
Yes, so suppose I can speak to DSO, and we were aware from the question in earlier committees that there's a concern perhaps in relation to the capacity of DSO and departments in bringing forward legislation, and also maybe in identifying if there's a particular issue with a particular legislative route, if that could be identified at an earlier stage. Well, in terms of ourselves, we recognise there's always room for improvement. In terms of capacity, we're a fairly fixed resource. We've got continually fluctuating demand from multiple areas within all the government departments, and so we're always managing that. But we are actually managing that through key engagement with the departments, and a focus as a management board now on that increased client engagement and demand management in order to provide a more dynamic and flexible service. There's already strong examples of client relationship management throughout DSO and relationships of trust with the departments, but the focus of the management board, directed by the departmental solicitor and led by myself, is on increased engagement at the right level, and that will vary for the various divisions within DSO. So we've got 4 advisory divisions, a commercial and property division and a litigation division, and it will also vary with clients. But the key purpose of it is that for us to engage with clients in order to talk about improvements to service, but also to make them aware of the level of our resource, getting to your point, the level of our resource, and the fact that in order for us to always be working on their priorities and on their most up-to-date instructions, we need to be engaging so we can move to those other matters if need be.
And just to specifically speak to the electronic registration of the deaths and stillbirths bill, I just want to ask you the detail around the process of that, because to me, on the outside looking in, it's the electronic operation of a registration process, and it's been happening. It was happening under, and it continues to be happening under, the extension of COVID regulations, and the process is there, it's established, the detail is there. I don't really understand why that couldn't have been lifted and moved straight across into a piece of legislation. It's quite succinct, it's quite concise. Even the most basic understanding, we understand what this piece of legislation is doing. So I just wonder if you could explain why this couldn't have been progressed quicker.
Yeah. Okay, so in 2022 we were asked a question when we were given a series of options that the GRO were considering. And one of those options was using the Electronic Communications Act to convert the process from the 1976 and the 2012 regulations digital. The legal advisor at the time sort of said that should be possible, but I need to reserve my position until I see a set of regulations and a draft order. And I think there was an influence there because it happened in England, and there was a thought process there. Okay, well it's been happening in our jurisdictions. We have similar powers. It really should be okay. We didn't see a set of draft regulations until the 29th of, I want to say, May 2024. The drafter, and this is another sort of party to this, but there's an external drafter, and just a wee second I'll explain why there's an external drafter. So, as I've outlined previously, departments are responsible for drafting their own legislation, but this was an unusual application of powers, not a usual GRO thing they were doing. They were using the Electronic Communications Act to digitise the process. Department asked for additional support with that with the drafter. So when the drafter supplied the regulations to us, he sought DSO input. He basically flagged, I think there's an issue with the VARAs, and the issue with the VARAs was the informant, the process is changing. There used to be 3 parties in the process under the 1976 order, but under the proposed order, there was going to be 2 parties in the process. So by changing the nature of the process, it's not a straight conversion, you change the process, and that fell outside the VARAs, outside the powers of the Electronic Communications Act. So it's quite if you look at the Electronic Communications Act, it doesn't say you must convert the process. Truthfully, it doesn't say that, but it does say it's to make anything that was done this way, that way. But by changing the thing, it's fallen outside the narrow scope, or the narrow, what they call the ambit of the 2001 Act. And that only became apparent to DSO when we first seen a copy of, or a set of the draft ordinance and the draft regulations, and that was unfortunately after the commitment was given to committee.
I want to appreciate that, and thanks very much for the clarity, because where we were sitting, we were getting advised this is a simple thing to get brought forward, and then it wasn't, which, you know, for us as a scrutiny committee, obviously, you know, flags significant concern.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to, you know, just a confirmation of when you think that we'll see this coming forward now.
So we're taking a back seat in the process. The various point is more or less primary legislation. This is well within the Assembly's competence. I think Dr. Wales gave evidence about, you know, when you add in the baby loss certificates, that can make things a bit more. But I spoke to the drafter in OLC in relation to get the paper that the DALO provided cleared, and he was of the opinion that the drafting is well advanced. And I was present just when the Minister gave a commitment, or a hopeful commitment, if you like, the first week in January, and certainly I haven't heard anything that runs counter to that.
Well, that's great to hear, and it's, you know, it's good legislation. I think we all want to just see it up and running, and standalone legislation as quickly as possible. Thank you, Chair.
All through.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your succinct answers so far, because you have been very helpful here today. Something I have been really concerned about is the capacity, but before going to the capacity, I want to talk about the specifics. Yep. So I think I'm right in what you say is the department, or in this case the GRO, stated that they wanted to amend the Electronic Communications Act, Northern Ireland 2020.
They wanted to use that Act to amend in 1976. Yes, that's right.
Yep.
That was one of the 4 options they had.
Right, so if they had 4 options, who then advises them on those 4 options as the best vehicle to proceed?
Apologies for cutting in. That is indeed our role.
Yes, okay.
So the advisor said, yes, I think that's possible, but until you see things written down, and it's really, really difficult. And if I'm the director of that division where the work was done, I'm not the person who did the work. But when you look at it, I think there's a thought that this was going to be the beginning of a process.
Yeah, of course.
So, and then we didn't hear much about further development, and then next thing you hear is we're getting a drafter and let's proceed.
So, let me tease that out a wee bit. I'm not sure whether it is a department official who is best placed to even set those parameters or set those list of options. Surely a department should be saying, we want to do A, B and C. We want it to be law. We need advice as to how we achieve that. And if it's through secondary legislation, through existing legislation, then you guys are the people. If it's primary legislation, then OLC is the people.
Yeah.
So,
which did happen in this case, I suppose that's what you're getting to, that advice was sought, and the DSO did say, yes, that looks like it was, there were various matters that were raised in addition to this Faries in seeking advice.
For the GRO to even have come up with Electronic Communications Act Northern Ireland 2001, strikes me as being a wee bit off.
It is used, has been used a few times. So
Yes.
it wouldn't have been, if you say to anybody, what's the best way to make this digital? People will say it's Electronic Communications Act, and different departments have used it. And there's another piece of legislation, secondary, that's working its way through that may come before this committee in due course that uses that same enabling legislation, but won't run aground of the same issue.
So we move on a wee bit,
Yep.
and you guys then advise GRO, but it could be any department, of course, but we're talking about a specific piece of legislation. You then decide basically that the best course of action is to subcontract this out to a drafter.
I'll let you finish your question, sorry.
So why was that decision taken, and why would there not be the capacity at that point, whenever DSO has already advised the GRO?
Yeah.
Why would you guys not in-house proceed?
The Red Book sets out people's responsibilities and roles. So ordinarily it's the department's own officials that draft.
Right.
So when the department approached DSO on the 29th of March, it was with a view to, we have an open list of drafters that we can put departments in touch with. So it's the department's responsibility to draft the legislation. They asked us, can you put us in touch with a suitably qualified drafter? And that was the engagement that, the beginning of the 11 and a half weeks.
Yes.
that's their particular role.
And the purpose, assuming in this situation where they, speaking generally, why they would be used is because it might be because it just is slightly more complex, but complex in the sense of taking up more time for the department. So it's really a more practical and efficient then to say, well, let's send it to a specialist drafter who'll be able to do this, much less time, and then that departmental official can work on something else.
Is there many drafters of that ilk kicking about the place?
Many are on the list.
There are 5 on the list. We've re-advertised it, so there's not many.
Yeah, okay. You have 179 staff in DSO, which is the Department Solicitor's Office. Now, I suspect not all of those people will be drafters.
Correct.
What's the breakdown between drafters, pure solicitors giving advice, and what is all your functions, if you like?
So out of those numbers, there'll also be, I think there's approximately 37 administrative staff, support staff, which are essential to the provision of our services. But in addition then, as I said, we've got the 6 divisions. So there's a litigation division and a commercial and property division. That's my personal for my substantive role where I've come from, and then the 4 advisory divisions. And the advisory, so even when you think about that, it's actually there's only 4/6 are advisory, and then out of that, there's various functions within the advisory law that they do. I don't know if you want to speak to.
I just want to be really clear about the difference between drafting and scrutiny of legislation. Yes. So we don't do any drafting under the Red Book. That's the way it's been since I joined the service. We provide the scrutiny of the legislation, so we would check and say, are your powers right? Does this achieve what the department thinks it achieves? And it's more or less the same function as the examiner of statutory rules. Yes. In terms of people who provide scrutiny to legislation, I would say there are around 20 to 25 lawyers in each advisory division. Now, there are various stages of their training. Some have joined quite recently, and some, but like a reasonable estimate, I think, off the top of my head, would be around 50%. So around, I'd say, 40 to 45 staff across the office.
Can I just ask us on that? Just a fact to put. Do you have figures on the head count of DSO? And if you don't have them with you, could we have them over the last sort of? I mean, ideally, the last decade would be useful. And if that's possible to get, I would just to know how big DSO is in head count terms compared to a decade ago. Go ahead.
And that was my last and final question, was to ask for a comparison over the last number of years.
I'm sorry, Paul, that was really
especially but when we're down.
Yes.
So you imagine that people would drift away, just as staff in this building would drift away to other legislators. And do you crank up near the end of a term? So are your numbers fluid like that?
So I suppose I hadn't 10 years figures, so just sort of figures for this year and last year. And this, as I said, we're fairly, at the minute, a fairly steady state. So the total, but that includes vacancies, etc., is 186 at the minute that I have, and 180 for last year. So certainly in terms of, like I say, we are working with a fairly fixed resource. It's more, and I'm comfortable within that, I would say. It's more a case of how we manage the various competing priorities across every single department in every area of it. But that's what we're getting better at, and that's where our focus is, I think, in terms of using the resource that we have.
So departments write up their own secondary legislation and primary legislation?
No, that's
OSC. Yeah. And then you guys in DSO scrutinise secondary legislation?
Correct.
But not primary legislation?
No.
Okay. Do you have a priority list as to what pieces of secondary legislation you will ever look at any given time? Or is it first come, first served?
So that was the opening piece I kind of was speaking to, that really, and I suppose, talking about lessons learned from this process, etc. I think you can't engage enough with clients, but also I think it's a matter of engaging across the piece, across the department. So like I say, my background's from the division in commercial and property, so it's slightly different from advisory because we have the benefit of dealing with particular units within a department. So it's slightly more complex for advisory, and that's what we're working on for the rest of this financial year in terms of one of our part of our business plan. But so the point being, that it's really client demand. It's client. We go with whatever they are saying is a priority, but telling them this is the resource, so we need to work that out, and we need a shared language around priorities. because obviously everything's a priority. You know.
Last question, Chair, I promise. Who is the Department of Solicitors Officers accountable to? What department? Is it Finance? So the Finance Minister, as opposed to the Executive as a whole? Yes, okay, thank you.
Okay, Jerry Carr.
Thanks. I didn't think the DSO would have been 179 staff. Not saying it shouldn't be, but I was kind of surprised at that size. But yeah, doing important work. I mean, is this the total staff across departments providing legal advice, or Department of Health, Justice have their own solicitors and in-house legal team as well, or?
The Department of Health.
Do you answer
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
So DOJ retains some of their own from the pre-devolution of justice. Otherwise, DSO provides legal advice. But we also do the advisory stuff for DOJ. So the vast majority of lawyers supporting Northern Ireland departments work within DSO.
Okay, that's useful. But there's maybe a handful in each department, maybe. But
Just justice.
Just justice, no other. So every toxic health minister gets a request, needs legal advice. He comes to DSO rather than going to internal.
Yes, that's
Okay,
correct.
okay.
And we're set up then, the advisory teams are set up so that in the divisions it's per departments. So for example, you know, one advisory might be, but there's no real linkage to it, it's just how Department for Infrastructure, Department of Education, Department of Health. So that one team then will have those specialisms, I suppose, as
And
well.
there's roughly 25 solicitors in those,
yes.
roughly. Okay.
Litigation slightly.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. And that's leading me on to my next question. And declaring interest is somebody trying to draft a PMB and who tried to in the last mandate. I mean, it seems to me, not to give you actual work which are in the committee, but strange to me that a lot of time when members are drafting PMBs, they're having to go to, you know, well able, but people in Britain who maybe aren't familiar with the legislation as much as you people, your solicitors would be. Like, it's certainly to me from the outside, appreciate I'm not in the sector, it seemed to be a quicker process, probably more cost-effective process to have DSO properly resourced, but to carry out a function to help MLAs, myself included, obviously, to declare that interest to help develop PMB. So it's a bit of self-interest as a question to get that PMB process sort of sped up. But do you have any view, or have you been asked to look at this, or what's your kind of consideration around that?
I suppose from my perspective, you know, I would say that our clients are the departments. We are, you know, it's the Departmental Solicitor's Office, so it's the departments come to us for legal advice, whether it's advisory, litigation or commercial and property, and that's how we're structured.
I presume it's a OLC who'd be doing the drafting of who'd be going to for the, as I'm saying, for your bill, Jerry.
No, it's outside, isn't it?
Yeah, because it's PMB, my understanding is the Northern Ireland Commission have legal advisors, and it's their task to support members in development of their private members' bills. And if then it's taken on by a department, if a minister likes the cut of your bills, Jib, they'll take it on, then OLC will give it a shine.
Yeah, no, I think there's just a lot of expertise there that could be utilised for more than departments, but I appreciate I may be in a minority on that point, but I thought I'd ask. Thanks.
Just one final question is, I mean, do we have a challenge? You know, the pressures in terms of legislation. We hear from Executive Minister, we hear from people doing private members' bills. Is it a challenge recruiting people? Because obviously you've got to compete with private legal salaries in the private sector, which are, you know, I assume very difficult to, you know, the tough competition, but also drafting and the work you do, detailed legislative scrutiny is I assume it is a particular specialism within the law. It's not the same as, you can't just walk in from, you know, if you're doing conveyancing in a small town solicitor's office or as a criminal defence barrister, they're different. So presumably it takes some time to train people.
Yes, so it's just answering the first point, the recruitment, we still have a lot of interest in people come. Yes, we do. I would say that's not a concern at the minute. I think, and certainly we put out the message, it's a privilege to work in the Departmental Solicitor's Office, most interest in legal work in Northern Ireland, and I think people recognise that. In terms of training then, yes, exactly. So it's slightly different again, talking about the 4 advisory divisions I think we're coming to. So you'd be very, very lucky. We can do, because it can be from other parts of jurisdiction or other departments, etc. But that people will have that, just happen to have that experience. But generally when they come in, there's training. And that's another aspect of the business plan this year, and one of our directors, Denise Kelly, has set up a cross-organisational training committee, and that's to identify training needs both within the organisation and also the management of the provision of that training, which includes on legislation. So that's very much the case, and we work in teams of specialism. So those there'll be one-to-ones, as we call them, each week. So there's training and that support on casework too. And we also, as that training committee, Denise and one of her assistant directors is providing that training on legislation to departments as well, because they too can experience changes in resourcing, etc. So that's been rolled out recently to the Department for Economy, and most recently this month to DAERA and some colleagues from DEO, and that will be probably rolled out then as well. Yeah.
Okay, very certain it's not lack of resource so much as, or it's not lack of interest. It's but there is you're constrained in terms of resource, but it's not because you can't. It's not because people don't want to join.
Well, we've had most recent recruitment. I was on a panel last November, so there were still large numbers applying. Yes.
Okay.
I think to your point, Chair, the people that we need aren't arriving ready to do this work.
Yeah.
I think so. There's a fair bit of training and specific training that needs to go into developing the resource, but people are definitely interested in joining and they really enjoy the work.
Good. That's most helpful. No further members have indicated they wish to ask questions, so I think at this point, thank you very much for your time and giving us that briefing. I would think most useful both around the Registration Act, or not Act, bill, as it will be at some point, hopefully, but also some of the other work. So thank you very much, Joanne and Ross, for your time. We really appreciate it. So members, can I suggest one action that occurs to me from that is, given we have this perennial question about resourcing to do with around legislation, it's not totally and exclusively within our committee's responsibility, but I wonder if it's worth us writing to the Department of Finance for just to get an update whether they think DSO is, adequately equipped in terms of headcount and resource to deal with the secondary legislation it will have to advise on, and of course the mandate. But I think also, and this is straying outside our departmental, but it is kind of inevitably connected. The question of OLC, to ask whether whether they think OLC has, because I think there is a question there, but because we've heard repeatedly about delays to the legislation programme, delays to specific bit of legislation because of the OLC. So I wonder if we can, and I don't know whether, or it might technically be TO.
Chair, what usually happens in those situations is the department will flag up that they have to go to another department for an input. So I think in the first instance it's perfectly fine writing to DOF, they will tell us. If they can't get that information, they'll redirect us to write to TO, but usually it's a request to TO for a part input.
Could I also add to that? Maybe we should ask for the definitions and the clear differences between DSO and the examiner statute rules.
Well, I think she advises us. She advises the Assembly, and they advise
to advise committee specifically. So at the start of every session, committee will agree to delegate that scrutiny function to the examiner, and that's when we get the examiner's reports on each of the statutory rules that committees would look at. She'll report on each of those.
She's effectively doing their job for us in some way. She's advising us on secondary legislation.
Similar.
The DSOs for the department.
It's totally
statute rules. Examiner statute rules for us. No, that's fine. I'm clear on that now. That's
okay.
Through the chair, just another one. It's interesting message about the OLC, because a number of times we've had ministers on the floor say one of the reasons why we haven't had legislation coming towards us is because of difficulties with around capacity of OLC.
I think that's the point I was making, Steve. I completely agree, and I think this is why we need to go back and just ask them whether they think OLC is sufficient.
Because we've had the DSO have said the bottleneck is OLC, we've heard ministers say the bottleneck is OLC, and we've been told that stuff isn't coming out of the executive because of OLC. So I
think we all agree that we need to ask that question about OLC. Right. Okay, excellent.
Well, you do. The Justice Minister is on record as saying it's the executive that has put this bar on bills. I've actually asked that question and I haven't got an answer yet.
I think we've got it. I'm going to just put a hat on this one so we can move on and try. But yes, I think we have an action which is to get clarity in terms of it's basically legal advice, whether it's DSO or OLC, whether it's on secondary or primary drafting, Do we have the capacity for the lights? And I know it's not all
We
our...
put through about the head count for the last decade as well. That's shown through
exactly.
to the department as well.
Because I think that's useful historical context for us to go through. Yes, I'm on page 9. So we're going to go
Sorry,
back.
head count
yes.
on specific drafters as opposed to just solicitors who give
Sure.
advice.
Okay. Although there are no drafters, I think in
No,
DSO.
no drafters in DSO.
Oh,
So
that's
yeah,
right.
that's
That's right.
reflective of the red book. We were just discussing we'd quite like access to the red book. So we'll also pursue that if members are
It's
agreeable.
OLC that has the drafters, so yeah, but we can ask that question. Okay, right, so we're going to go back to matters arising, members, and just finish a few points off that we haven't yet. 5.5 is WMS from the Health Minister on the 21st of November budget assessment. That's at page 79 of the meeting pack. You will have seen that already. He sets out the current financial position, including unmet pressures around 24-25 pay settlements, and we discussed this already. So members, this is to note, unless anybody wishes to make a comment. Noted. Okay, the next agenda item is city deals. At page 90, members will find a copy of the 20 current city deal projects. It was very helpful. Indeed, there was an event sponsored by Mr. Brett upstairs. I wasn't able to make it, but it was very useful, and so that is there to note, and I think is a useful summary. People are content to note. 5.7 is appropriately enough the examiner's statutory rules' 27th report. Members will find the 27th report of the examiners of statutory rules. Last week the committee agreed it was content with SR 2024-191, the Building Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2024, subject to the examiner's report. The examiner has now reported in the rule and has not drawn any matters to our special attention, and there are no other rules relevant to us in the report. Just on that point, Mr. Carroll requested clarification last week around definition of the person with fire safety duties. So we are going to go, if people are content, the clerk's had a look, but we're going to formally ask the committee, the department for that clarification.
Thanks, Chair, and just appreciate the officials' work on that. I mean, the reason is there's a bit of an anomaly around the Grenfell stuff where he was responsible for fire safety. So, I mean, it sounds very technical, but it's to kind of clarify, the person responsible or part of the fire and rescue service rather than some unnamed or unclear character. So just so people know, that's why I'm looking at information. Thanks.
Now, the next agenda item is 5.8, which is a letter from the Secretary of State in relation to the Executive Restoration Package, and that is at page 3 of your tabled pack. And it's a response to a letter which we sent, in which we, among other things, we suggested that we look to build upon our request for UK government ministers and or officials to brief this committee. The Secretary of State has responded to say he doesn't think that would be entirely appropriate. He says he acknowledges that request. I need to make it clear that UK government civil servants are accountable to Parliament. I do not believe it would be appropriate for them to appear before Northern Ireland Assembly committees. I think there's an interesting constitutional debate about whether civil servants are technically accountable to Parliament, whether it's ministers are accountable to Parliament. Yes. But I, if members are content, would note as in the pack, and members can comment on it. I think it's a little, put it diplomatically, a little disappointing. But I think we should go back to the Secretary of State with a letter pointing out that there are certainly precedents for UK government ministers briefing devolved committees. In fact, one that I encountered recently was the Welsh or Scottish counterpart who was in this room with us a couple of weeks ago, who said that the previous Tory Culture Secretary had briefed his committee, and it has happened. Indeed, Michael Gove, I think, I don't know if he had agreed to come to this committee or another committee.
He appeared in front of TEO, I want to say.
No, we had Lord Frost.
Lord Frost.
Yes, and Mara Shefkovich.
So I think it's important that in a respectful and collaborative way, we gently go back and say that prohibition is not kind of, I'm not sure where that's written down. I think my view, and I'm happy to hear others, is that I think there are certain contexts in which it is not our job to hold a UK government minister directly accountable in a constitutional sense, that they are elected to that Parliament, and that's the job of the UK Parliament. I accept that. and indirectly officials work to them, and so they are accountable indirectly, as I say, to the UK Parliament. But I do think there are instances, and I think this is what we talked about, where it is useful and sensible for the UK government to provide evidence, or to at least be open and sympathetic to providing evidence to devolved committees where we could not get, where that evidence is critical to our work, and we could not plausibly get that evidence from the devolved department. The executive restoration package is an example. There are aspects of that package that where, and we had the minister and the senior officials in front of us, some of that we would be getting it second hand from them, or they wouldn't know. So I'm just gently, I think we should go back gently and try and make those points. Others want to come in. The Vice Chair wants to come in first, and then we'll bring in Steve and Chair Carl.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. First of all, could we revise what we agreed that we were corresponding on? I think we did agree earlier in this meeting we were going to take correspondence on the NIO role within the Public Sector Transformation Board. Was that directly to the Secretary of State, or?
I don't think we. Sorry, do you mean in the rule? I don't think we ever agreed to write to them about the PSTB,
okay,
but
so
we could include that in a letter.
Yeah, so I was just wanting to revise what we had agreed at the start of the meeting. I couldn't just remember. And then just secondary to that, the Secretary of State has, noted here about officials coming. Can we invite himself to come here to represent on it? Because it used to be the custom that you would have had a representative from the British government going to the different, devolved institutions to outline things coming out of the budget. So perhaps if he doesn't think the officials should come here to answer questions, perhaps he himself with his position on the finances in Northern Ireland.
Well, I think we can respectfully say that we are, as it were, doors always open for evidence. I'm sure people would all agree on that, but I think there is a way of us saying we are aware that you have a role in terms of agreeing the PSTB. We acknowledge that you're primary, you're accountable to Parliament, but we would respectfully say that in the context of devolution and the reset, what's called the reset around some of this stuff, that you think about, that you consider, and it might not be that we get an immediate letter back that he considers this, but I'm slightly disappointed, but I don't want to completely give up hope that we'll get some progress. Steve,
on that, using the Secretary of State's wonderful logic, I think we should be inviting Julie Harrison to come and talk to us about the Interim Transformation Board. Because
say it again?
Invite Julie Harrison to come and speak to us, because she sits in the Interim Transformation Board. It's germane to both Northern Ireland and also to the wider UK. And it would be, I can't imagine that the Secretary of State would find anything wrong in somebody who's going to be so central to the transformation of delivery of services in Northern Ireland, of coming in, giving evidence to the committee that it's our responsibility.
We're going to get Jerry and yourself, Jerry.
Yeah, just a quick observation. I mean, obviously, new government, but same approach. But the obvious point is they're making economic decisions that are having a negative impact on many of our constituents. So I think both the officials and the ministers should, at the very least, be asked questions of this committee.
Yeah, I would just say on the Julie Harrison point, I think it's probably worth saying that, to be fair, she's part of the we could have questions about the appropriateness or about the terms of reference around her being on the PSTB, but she is part of a broader PSTB, so I'm not sure it would be, I'm not sure we could plausibly ask her to come and give evidence by herself on that, out with the context of it.
Invite the ball. No, I'm more than happy to.
Well, I think that's fine. I think we're going to get evidence of that at some point. But Deirdre Hargey.
I'll make the same point, but I think he's being facetious with it. And let's see, right back to Hillary, and let's see how sisterly he is as a sister party. So.
I didn't possibly. I'm
really facetious.
I think I've shown my willingness to be.
Jerry, I'm going to bring that letter in draft back to the committee.
Yeah, we'll bring
I just want to
the
make sure I
back
cover
in
everything,
draft.
because it's quite a lot going on.
Well, if you're wanting a hook, the hook could be the actual terms of reference for the PSTB.
I mean, I think the broader point is, leaving aside specific questions, leaving aside party politics, there is actually a point about if you want to think about the way you can improve the way devolution works, then there is an argument for more thoughtful engagement between devolved legislatures and committees and the UK government, because there's information that we need to have for our work.
I think the big thing
is there was precedent for this.
Yes.
So are they stepping away from that now and taking a different policy
Yeah.
approach?
That's it.
So I think definitely to go back on that.
Okay, so we get that letter drafted and come back for
For us to
discussion.
discuss it.
Okay, so,
Go to page 14.
yeah, we're going to go to page 14. So we are now going back to the forecast outturn, which we touched on briefly. There's a written briefing from the department there, and obviously it gives an indication of where we are in terms of pressures. It's at page 462 of the meeting pack for the clerk's memo, and at page 29 there's a departmental briefing paper which is in the tabled pack. Does any member wish to make a comment on this? I don't know if you wish to, Diane or Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just thought it was good to have had this, being able to question Joanne and that around it. So I'll look forward to seeing the next month's one, which will take account and reflect the October monitoring rounds, as she said, because realistically these ones aren't live and current because they're not really reflective of that right now. So.
Yeah.
Chair,
Yeah.
just a quick one. One of the things I think they talked about was potential additional barnets coming for any variation on Nick or what it's likely to be as the rest of it. That will have a significant impact, I think, on the outrun. So as soon as we can get some information on that, that would be quite useful as well. Because I mean, they will be putting together the sort of the monitoring round, but I mean that's going to influence quite considerably where the outrun's going to be on it.
So you mean whenever they get the confirmation of how much additional money they're getting on the pressure for Nick in the public sector?
Yeah.
And I think they are going to get something, but they're saying it's not going to be.
No, but I think that the key, Chair, is the bit of how much they're expecting to get. Because remember, a lot of the forecasts for the budget on the outturns that we had this year so far were forecasting what we were going to get, and then we got more. But it's also the question of there is obviously discussions going on behind the scenes across government. So that might be useful just to get a sense of where that's going to.
Sorry, can I suggest we book in officials for that? We usually take it as a written briefing,
Yeah.
and we then get commentary as we get Joanne, but it might just be useful, Chair, to book in officials for this.
On what
So specifically on the next outturn, as Joanne has said, we'll see a lot more evidence of figures we've seen in statements coming through, but also, as she said, you should see departments working down the overcommitment.
Okay.
Because we've now hit that point in the financial year.
Yeah,
where
okay.
that has to be happening.
I think I think Joanne said that they expect to get confirmation of the amount of national insurance additionality they're going to get in supplementary estimates. But UK supplementaries is generally February, I think. Yeah. So that will probably be when that is confirmed. But yeah, I'm happy to.
Chair, that's another thing I would flag up. We have indicative for our SSE's briefing on first week in February. So that I think is predicated on the expectation that they'll have had the Westminster figures by then. So we've already booked that one in.
Okay.
Completeness.
Okay, that's just we will pursue that then. The next agenda item is the NI Youth Assembly. No apologies, I need to go back to we're at correspondence. We covered all that. I think our covered all our matters arising, and we are now on to agenda item 9, which is correspondence. So 9.1 is gender budgeting and NI from the Academics University of Ulster. We have been sent some useful working papers from the Department of Accounting in UU regarding their project examining the potential of gender budgeting in Northern Ireland, and there's lots of information there. Obviously members can examine those in themselves, but we think in terms of some of the discussions we've had already, including at the strategic away day, that the way to proceed is to look for Ray to do some research for us and then come back with something. The Vice Chair wishes to come in.
Yeah, I just wanted to just raise the point that you've just made, that I think it's important that it comes through RAISE because there are significant papers and researches across gender budget, and like many of us have got them through a lot of different organisations, a lot of different women's groups, a lot of different all-party groups, so it would be really good to capture them all in the one place. I think the messages are strong coming through, but I just wouldn't want to pick up one or two. There's so many out there.
Okay, if people are content with that, the next agenda item is 9.2, which is the Brussels report. The committee has been sent a copy of the Office for the NI Executive in Brussels report, which is to note, unless anybody wishes to make any comment. The next one is the Youth Assembly consultation response to the draft programme for government. So the Youth Assembly's response to draft PFG is at page 568, and a copy is there for members to look at, unless anybody wishes to comment on it. No. 9.4 is the Public Accounts Committee report on public procurement in Northern Ireland. You will find a copy of that report, which is published on the 21st of November, and that is to note, unless anybody wishes to make any comment. Steve
Yes,
Aiken.
Chair. Just a quick one. Look, some of the recommendations are all about capacity and capability and strong leadership and oversight and the use of public procurement professionals. Yet we've got the Interim Transformation Board with 2 members on it who are not trained in procurement. So there is obviously, the PAC have already reported about one of the significant issues that we have, but we have an Interim Transformation Board that doesn't have any procurement, or only has 2 of the 3 are not procurement professionals. So there is a sort of, we're already seeing a disconnect between what the PAC are reporting and what, one of the things that should be a potential recommendation should be that any transformation board, if it's about procurement, has procurement experts on it.
I mean, I think there's a legitimate debate about whether the Public Sector Transformation Board, and we all have comments on it, is about procurement. It's sort of more about a strategic, I'm not sure it's definitively about procurement, is it? I think it's more about the strategic,
well,
the bit
they're,
before
they're spending public money, so I think that is procurement by anybody's definition, Chair.
I'm not sure. I mean, the Finance Minister is not obliged to, I'm not sure if anybody in this chamber, well, Diane and Owen have accounting expertise, but I don't know if we're all. Personally, I think your point is noted, but I'm not entirely sure that I would, even with my critical hat on, that procurement is necessarily specialism. But I think point taken. But I think, yeah, go ahead.
And just to declare, I also sit on the Public Accounts Committee and was on this inquiry. Yeah. But you know, Deirdre had actually mentioned it earlier in this meeting about, you know, the between £2 and £4 billion is spent every single year through so that's procurement. So it's just, you know, the general spend, and so there are some really significant recommendations in that, but obviously the PAC has primacy and we'll be following up on the recommendations of those, but I do think that it's important to highlight them here, because
it's definitely an important report for us.
The responsibility does fall to finance. It'd be good to keep a close view on them, but again, you know, the fact that there was no bringing forward of a project on procurement as a transformation piece, I think is maybe more what Steve's saying, because there was no bid to do something there too.
No actual means of, you know, looking at how you do procurement as a transforming procurement, rather
it isn't seen as a, you know, priority in that place.
But I came through the chair, and we set up a strategic investment board which was supposed to do procurement, and it's just turned out to be a glorified HR agency. I mean, there are real issues here, and I think the PAC have done a really good job. But actually, you know, the whole purpose of transformation is to transform how we deliver government and how we spend our money. So I think there's an issue here.
Okay, Terry Hargey.
I don't even know if it's another area for Raise to kind of look at in terms of when we're looking at the finances, and as Joanne said earlier, in terms of better budgeting going forward and looking at gender-based budgeting and everything else. Obviously procurement does play a key role in terms of how much money is being recycled back into the local economy again, so whether that's on small and medium enterprise, whether you're doing social clauses and kind of looking at all of those things, but even looking at examples of, you know, across these islands of what is working well, what's not. I've raised before in terms of the community wealth building panel report that was done, which obviously links into finance, economy and communities. Yeah. You know, is there something that we could be looking at in the context of that wider piece of work that we are picking up, where procurement can play a part in that? Because I know even within that wealth building report, procurement was a key section in that as well. So I know obviously this report sits with the PAC, but if there's learning for finance, that we could actually make it better in terms of social outcomes, social value, you know, and how that interacts even with the community and voluntary sector, just as one area. I think would be good just to see good practice elsewhere to start with.
Okay, we can ask Raise to look at that too as part of the other work. Okay, great. The next agenda item is the report of the annual report of the Registrar General, page 611. Members will find a copy of the annual report of the Registrar General in 2023, which was laid on the 21st of November 2024. In the course of 2023, the GRO, working in collaboration with the 11 registrars and 72 deputy registrars in the District Registration Office, registered more than 45,000 life events. There's lots of saying the word register quite a lot there, which is challenging me. Registered more than 45,000 life events relating to people from across Northern Ireland. Statistics are provided in that report. That's to note, unless anybody wishes to talk about it further. 9.6 is the examiner statutory rules. The 26th report is included, and it's included for noting purposes only. Agenda item 10 is our draft for work programme. I'll ask the clerk to speak. We obviously have just two before Christmas, but we are now filling up for January.
Chair, we're rapidly filling up. So members, just to flag up, and we put further information out, we have an informal meeting with the Business Coalition. Members saw the correspondence in last week's pack. That's Monday the 9th, 11 till 12 in room 106, far end of the next floor. We'll flag up again. We've got an update on January the 15th, the first meeting on the budget sustainability annexes that members were talking about today. We've got a briefing on that, and we're scheduling oral briefings, evidence briefings for the banking inquiry from the 15th as well. We're just waiting for some confirmations on that. Our joint budget event on the 29th of January with the Economy Committee is moving on apace. Invitations are out. We've had a number of replies already. We're probably looking at about 50 stakeholders all in for that. And again, we'll forward more information. And we've got the oral briefing on the spring supplementary scheduled for the 5th of February.
Okay.
Are we doing Christmas Jumper Day on the 11th of December?
That is to be. There's a question about
We'll
procurement.
be in the chamber debate.
There's a question about procurement there, and who can procure
Articles 5 to 10.
We can do that in Christmas Jumper Day.
Yes.
Humbug.
Yes. So just to say, I will in advance. I'm going to give my apologies for next week, and it is possible that the vice chair will also have to send apologies. So. To say in advance that should anybody wish to ascend to the dizzy heights of the chair of the Finance Committee, you will have the opportunity next week, because we will, I'm afraid, need to, I'm giving my apologies now, so if anybody else wishes to chair, that opportunity is open.
Usually it's helpful if someone emerges before we need to go to a vote, and then that's just easier for everybody.
Can I just put on record my apologies where I was intending to dial in by Zoom because of something in the constituency to pop out to, which is why I can't chair it over Zoom, because I'll be out for about half an hour off it, so apologies.
So if someone, what I would say is if someone is willing to emerge from the mist.
I just need to check whether I'm going to be in Brussels or not, but if I'm not, I will not be up here stuck.
Okay, and I didn't even have to promise a Christmas drink there in order to make that happen. Of course I couldn't also do that. The rules would not permit it. Okay, thank you very much. So that is, that's the forward work programme. The next agenda item is any other business. Does anyone have any other business?
Chair, just really quickly, I'm really conscious of time, and we're going to lose people at 5 o'clock, but we've never had an opportunity to take a photograph of the committee, and this is the first time with everybody here. So if, once you adjourn, we all run to the stairs outside in the Great Hall, we'll do a photograph. It doesn't work well in here. It's just cramped, and it's not really great, and the outside looks a lot better.
Okay, well, if people are content with that, we'll go right now.
There's something on in the Great Hall.
Oh, well, there's not, is there?
There is a stage or something. There's an event.
You can still stand up on the stairs a bit.
Let's just go look.
Yeah, we'll just go by high.
So in that case, I'll just, date, time and place of next meeting is in this room on the 4th of December at 2 p.m, and I will now adjourn the meeting. The committee is now adjourned.
Run and do this.
Run! Somebody take us, picture of us running. That would be good.
How do you shut down your new service?
Oh, thing not there.